Chapter 478. Go to watch net. When Li Yundong saw that Chen Yunyan, whom he had never met before, was the first to challenge him, he was stunned and thought to himself, "Why are you looking for me?" Zi Yuan chuckled and said, "Of course I'm looking for you. Who told you to be so popular now? Who doesn't want to defeat you and become the #1 master of the younger generation?" Li Yundong shook his head and smiled. False reputation is harmful. He stood up, cupped his hands, and said with a smile, "Zhenren Chen, thank you for your high opinion of me. I, Li Yundong, should naturally accept the challenge. But before I do, can you tell me why you picked me out of so many cultivators?" Chen Yunyan sneered and said, "Zhenren Li, do you remember that you defeated my shitty in the Battle of Mount Tianlong?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and vaguely remembered that he seemed to have defeated a cultivator from the Qingwei sect. However, because the cultivator had launched a sneak attack, he had left without even saying his name. Even Li Yundong didn't know who he had defeated. Go to watch net. Li Yundong smiled and said, "I seem to remember something like that. How do you want to fight, Zhenren Chen?" Chen Yunyan was wearing a long robe and a mandarin jacket. He shook the hem of his robe and walked over to the crowd in 2 steps. He cupped his hands to Wang Jinyuan and said, "Master Wan, please make an empty table." Wang Jinyuan smiled and said, "What's so difficult about that? Someone, make a table for Zhenren Chen." As he spoke, 2 Taoists from the Gazao sect rushed over. One of them lifted the table, and the other lifted the legs of the table. They quickly assembled a square table for 8 people. Then, they bowed to Wang Jinyuan and quickly left. Everyone saw that the square table was about 1.5 meters in diameter and was made of high-quality mahogany. The edge of the table was carved with exquisite patterns. Chen Yunyan took 8 cups and a kettle from his table and placed them on the table. They whispered to each other and guessed how Chen Yunyan was going to fight with Li Yundong. Chen Yunyan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said, "Zhenren Li, there are 8 cups here. I will fill them with water in a moment, and then we will each use our shentong to urge thunder with water. Let's see whose shentong is more mysterious. What do you think?" When everyone heard this, they immediately whispered excitedly, "This battle is interesting. I just don't know what kind of effect it will have." Some knowledgeable cultivators also nodded slightly and said, "Yes, the thunder spell is the most difficult spell in the world. It is extremely difficult to control the thunder in this extremely small cabin space. A little carelessness will hurt others. I just don't know if these 2 people have enough cultivation. Otherwise, they will be trapped in a cocoon of their own making." Ding Nan couldn't help whispering to Zhang Yuan, "Master, why do they put 4 cups here if they want to fight with the thunder method?" Zhang Yuan stroked his white beard and narrowed his eyes at Chen Yunyan. He said, "There are several ways to attract thunder in this world. The first is to attract thunder with qi, just like on Mount Tianlong. Zhang Tianhe and Li Yunyang both used qi to attract thunder. The other method was to use talismans to attract thunder. For example, the Jinshan sect, Maoshan sect, and other sects mainly use talismans to cultivate thunder. Another method is to attract thunder with water. Because thunder originates from water, thunder magic can be triggered through water magic. This is also a way to attract thunder." Zhang Yuan looked Chen Yunyan up and down and secretly nodded in praise. Chen Yunyan is young, but he is very clever. Among the cultivation sects in the world, the Qingwei sect is the most proficient in attracting thunder with water. He must have heard of Li Yundong's ability to attract thunder with qi, so he wants to use his strength to attack the enemy's weakness. Hey, what a schemer! Only then did Ding Nan understand, and she looked at Li Yundong worriedly. However, Li Yundong didn't seem to notice Chen Yunyan's thoughts. He smiled and said, "Why do you need to go forward? I can also fight here." His words were easy to say, but the people around him suddenly burst into an uproar, especially the cultivators of the Qingwei sect. They all glared at Li Yundong. Chen Yunyan said with an ugly expression, "Zhenren Li, are you so conceited?" Zhou Qin frowned and whispered to Su Chan, "Su Chan, why are they so angry?" Su Chan looked at Li Yunyang worriedly and whispered, "Although it said that water is used to attract thunder, in the final analysis, it's still using one's own zhenqi to catalyze the water in front of him, and finally make the water surge into thunder. Therefore, standing closer will naturally have an advantage. Yundong is standing so far away, so his zhenqi has to be transported far away. It's like a person fighting in his own territory, and Yundong has to go through a long journey to enter the battlefield. This is a big disadvantage. Zi Yuan also said in a low voice, Li Yundong, don't be arrogant. Although the Qingwei sect has declined and become a small sect, the Qingwei sect is still a small sect. However, during the Yuan and Ming dynasties, this was also an impressive sect. Dao Fa Hui Yuan was written by Zhao Yizhen of the Qingwei sect, so it should not be underestimated. In particular, the Qingwei sect mainly cultivated thunder. In the world, only the Lingxiao sect and the Zhangyi school could compete with the Qingwei sect in thunder magic. Chen Yunyan is competing with you in thunder magic. You must not underestimate him. Zi Yuan spoke hurriedly and quickly, reminding Li Yundong not to underestimate his opponent 3 times in a row. Although Li Yundong didn't believe that Chen Yunyan would be his opponent, he still smiled at Zi Yuan gratefully and stepped to the table. When Chen Yunyan saw Li Yundong step forward, his expression became a little better. He snorted, picked up a teapot, and filled the 8 cups in front of the table with the etiquette of the tea ceremony. After Chen Yunyan put down the teapot, he cupped his hands and said, Zhenren Li, I've set the rules. How about you pick the teacups first? Li Yundong smiled and said, I'll pick the 4 left by you, Zhenren Chen. Seeing that Li Yundong was so arrogant, Chen Yunyan frowned secretly and sneered. He quickly touched the teacups one by one, and then pushed the 4 teacups in front of him. He said in a clear voice, I've chosen. Zhenren Li, please. Li Yundong glanced at Chen Yunyan and smiled slightly. With a wave of his sleeve, the 4 teacups were neatly arranged in front of him as if there was an invisible hand fiddling with them. Li Yundong's handsome move immediately attracted many cultivators' loud cheers. Among them, Wei Qing, a female cultivator who had a good impression of Li Yundong, cheered the loudest. Yu Shang couldn't help frowning and saying, Shiji, is it necessary to shout so loudly? What's so great about this? Wei Qing said with a smile, It's nothing great, but I just think that Zhenren Li is very handsome when he uses it. If you're not convinced, why don't you use it too? Yu Shang rolled his eyes, snorted with his nose in the air, and didn't say anything. Wei Qing was already used to her Shiji's temper. She pulled Yu Shang's arm and whispered, Hey, who do you think will win? Yu Xing said without thinking, Nonsense, of course it's Li Yundong. The Qingwei sect was almost extinct during the Qing dynasty. Who is this Chen Yunyan? I've never heard of him. He's just a nobody. He's not worth mentioning. Wei Qing said with a little flagging interest, There's no suspense at all? I thought that since Chen Yunyan dared to take the initiative to challenge, he must have some ability. Yu Shang snorted coldly. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw Chen Yunyan make an obeisance by cupping one hand in the other before his chest and saying in a clear voice, Fellow Taoists, please watch carefully. I will use these 4 cups of water as a medium to attract thunder, and let everyone see what a small divine tribulation looks like. Yu Shang was stunned when he heard this. Before he could react, he saw Chen Yunyan suddenly let out a loud roar that sounded like a dragon's roar and a tiger's roar. This loud roar was so loud that it actually shook the 4 cups in front of him and made them jump up. Chen Yunyan waved one hand over the 4 cups and mobilized his zhenqi to forcibly suck up all the water in the cups. Everyone saw that 4 water columns suddenly appeared out of thin air in the 4 cups, and the liquid tea seemed to have turned into solid columns at this moment. Chen Yunyan's other hand chopped off the roots of the 4 water columns the moment they rose into the air. He held all 4 water columns in his 2 hands. He let out a loud shout and squeezed all the zhenqi in his body into the palms of his 2 hands. The 4 water columns were squeezed into a fist-sized water ball. As soon as the water ball was squeezed by his zhenqi, it immediately became smaller and smaller. Ripples could be faintly seen in the middle of the water ball because of the constant pressure. Everyone watched as Chen Yunyan mobilized his own Zhan Yuan, abruptly squeezing the fist-sized water ball into the size of a thumb. This water ball constantly emitted a burst of mist. This mist rose up and slowly drifted in front of Chen Yunyan, forming a small majestic cloud of mist, as if it was a cloud of mist in the sky. Although everyone didn't know what Chen Yunyan was going to do next, they knew that it was impossible to compress a fist-sized water ball into a thumb-sized water droplet unless it was an extremely powerful and condensed Niden. Seeing this, Yu Sheng couldn't help but look solemn. Wei Qing also widened her eyes and said in a low voice, Shidi, you're wrong. This is a great master. Then with a shake of Chen Yunyan's hands, The thumb-sized water droplet suddenly jumped up on its own and drilled into the clouds floating in the air. In an instant, as soon as the water droplet entered the clouds, the color of the clouds gradually became thicker, as if dark clouds had covered the sky and become dark. There was also a rumbling sound of thunder slowly coming from the clouds. Even the sky outside the yacht became dark, as if it had suddenly turned from a sunny day to a cloudy one. Chen Yunyan pinched his fingers and recited quickly, "Give birth to heaven and earth, control water and fire, enlighten the gods, the master of all Tao." After he finished reciting the last word, he suddenly shouted, "Thunder!" Crack! Everyone felt as if their ears had been stabbed by a sharp blade. It was as if a bomb had suddenly exploded in the air. Everyone was shaken by the sudden clap of thunder in the cabin. The blood in their chests churned, and their eardrums were in extreme pain. Boom! Then, there was another deafening sound of thunder outside the cabin. Everyone was shocked when they heard it and thought to themselves, "Winter thunder?" Chen Yunyan used water to attract thunder, and he actually attracted winter thunder. Zi Yuan looked at Chen Yunyan with awe and thought to herself, "This is the long-lost secret method of Qingwei Shenlai. Not only can this person cast thunder by himself, but he can also cause heaven thunder to rumble. This thunder cultivation is really scary." Under everyone's awe-inspiring gaze, Chen Yunyan said in a clear voice, "Everyone, please look, heaven thunder is here." As soon as he finished speaking, a small bolt of lightning fell from the clouds in front of him. The lightning fell on the teacup, causing it to tremble violently. Following that, another bolt of lightning struck the cups. What was even more terrifying was that every time a bolt of lightning struck the clouds in front of Chen Yunyan, there would be a rumbling sound of thunder coming from outside the yacht, as if it was resonating with the thunder. In the blink of an eye, 81 bolts of lightning fell from the clouds in succession. The speed was so fast that it was dizzying. Everyone felt as if there was an invisible hand covering their mouths and noses, making it hard for them to breathe. They couldn't help but think, "What if this lightning strikes me?" After waiting for the last bolt of lightning to strike, everyone suddenly saw the dark clouds gradually dissipate, and the sky outside the yacht gradually became clear. The 4 teacups in front of Chen Yunyan were still standing in the same place, undamaged. Chen Yunyan cupped his hands to everyone in the cabin and said, "Everyone, please have a look." After that, he gently fanned the 4 teacups with his hand. A very slight breeze blew past, and the 4 teacups turned into 4 piles of powder. Then he knocked on the mahogany square table in front of him with his hand, but there was a tapping sound. The mahogany table was still as hard as before. Everyone was shocked. They knew that the 81 bolts of heaven thunder had already smashed the teacups into powder. But when so many bolts of lightning fell, all of them were concentrated on the 4 wine cups. None of them hit the mahogany table, so the teacups turned into powder, but the table was unscathed. It was one thing for Chen Yunyan to be able to summon water into lightning, but he was also able to trigger the lightning outside to increase its power and prevent it from falling. At the same time, he was able to control the lightning that he had created to accurately strike the 4 teacups. Heaven thunder was the most difficult to control, but this person could control it as accurately as a missile. What an exquisite and terrifying thunder-controlling kung fu! Most of the people in the cabin knew what he was doing. For a moment, they were all speechless and looked at Chen Yunyan with their mouths agape. There was only one thought in their minds. When did the Qingwei sect have such a powerful master? After Chen Yunyan performed his magic, he proudly cupped his hands and said, "Zhenren Li, it's your turn." Chapter 479. Go to Watch Network. For a moment, the cabin of the cruise ship was extremely quiet. Everyone stared at Chen Yunyan in a daze, as if they couldn't understand who this Sun Wukong was. After all, Zhang Ling was a senior of the Zhangyi school and was very knowledgeable. She looked Chen Yunyan up and down in surprise and couldn't help asking, "Which branch of the Qingwei sect are you from? Who is Zhang Yunyan to you?" Chen Yunyan looked at Zhang Ling in surprise, then made an obeisance by cupping his hands and said, "Zhenren Zhang is really amazing. You can see through my master at a glance. My original name is Chen Xing, and I am the successor of Grandmaster Zhang Yunyan of the Qingwei sect." The cultivators in the hall burst into an uproar when they heard this. Zhang Tianhe couldn't help but exclaim, "Zhang Yunyan still has a successor? That's impossible." Du Fei laughed and said to Yu Sheng in a low voice, "It turns out that he's from the same sect. Good news, good news." Yu Sheng snorted and didn't say anything, but there was no longer any contempt in his eyes. 7K. Oath M. Wei Qing, who was next to him, said in a low voice, "Come on, what do you mean Bibe from the same sect? It's been almost 1,000 years. Who would recognize him?" Zhou Qin was not far from Wei Qing. When she heard Wei Qing's words, she was puzzled, so she asked Ziyuan, "Ziyuan, who is Zhang Yunyan? Why did Du Fei say that Chen Yunyan is from the same sect?" Ziyuan said in a low voice with a serious expression, "Zhang Yunyan, also known as Zhang Daogui, is from Changsha, Hunan. He entered Mount Wudong from 1264 to 1294 AD, and became the disciple of Zhenren Wang Zhenchang of the Chuanzhen sect. Later, he became the disciple of Huang Shunshan, the great master of the Qingwei sect. Therefore, Zhang Yunyan is a great cultivator of both the Chuanzhen sect and the Qingwei sect. That's why Du Fei said that since this Chen Yunyan is a descendant of Zhang Yunyan's bloodline, then they share the same origin." Zhou Qin nodded in understanding. She asked again, "Is Zhang Yunyan very powerful? Why is everyone so surprised when it comes to him?" Ziyuan nodded slightly and said with a serious face, "This Zhang Yunyan is known as Lei Wang. As the name implies, his thunder magic is quite powerful. At that time, he could be said to be unparalleled in the world in the Tang dynasty. Moreover, Zhang Yunyan had many disciples at that time and greatly promoted the name of the Qingwei sect. It was very likely that Chen Yunyan wanted to carry forward the Qingwei sect, so he changed his name to Chen Yunyan. From this, it can be seen that this person's ambitions are not small." After hearing this, Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong with a worried face. Although she had just reached the Zhuji phase and the zhenqi in her body was vigorous, she was like a Hercules who only had strength but no moves. She had brute force but didn't know how to fight. In her opinion, Chen Yunyan's divine ability was simply a miracle. She couldn't imagine how a human could do that. "Master, can he win?" Zhou Qin couldn't help biting her lip and asked anxiously. Ziyuan frowned slightly. After a long time, she did not come up with a conclusion. She took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "A strong enemy." This was a rare opponent. This person's ability to control lightning was probably on par with Zhang Yunyan. I don't know if Li Yundong can resist it. Su Chan was also so anxious that she secretly stamped her feet. She looked at Chen Yunyan with a bitter face and said in a low voice, "Why is the first person who appeared so powerful? How can I live?" Ziyuan shook her head and laughed. "There are naturally many strong people in the Taoist assembly, but Chen Yunyan has endured until now. He must have a big plan. Today, he wants to use Li Yundong to make himself famous. He really has bad intentions." Zhou Qin clenched her fists tightly and stared at the field with her eyes wide open. She suddenly hated that her cultivation was still too low and she couldn't help Li Yundong out. Zhang Xueqi of the Qingqing sect also laughed in a low voice. He whispered to his companion, "It seems that I don't need to do anything. I'm afraid that Chen Yunyan will solve Li Yundong's problem. This is the first time I've heard of this person's ability to control lightning, not to mention seeing it. In terms of controlling lightning, I'm afraid that no one here can compare to him." Li Yundong was too careless and fell into Chen Yunyan's trap. He brought this upon himself. He can't live. At this time, some of the cultivators in the field looked at Li Yundong with schadenfreude, while others looked at him worriedly and were secretly worried for him. However, Li Yundong stood where he was with a smile on his face, as if nothing had happened just now. He cupped his hands to Chen Yunyan and said, "Zhenren Chen, good skill. Now it's my turn." Chen Yunyan suddenly looked at Li Yundong strangely. He said with a faint smile, "Zhenren Li, if you admit defeat now, it's not too late. At least you can step down with dignity." Li Yundong didn't seem to hear his words. He still had a gentle smile on his face. After he came out of the tracheocosm, the anger in his body seemed to have dissipated completely. He was no longer like the immature and reckless young man he used to be, who would easily get angry. Li Yundong laughed and said, "Zhenren Chen's thunder control skill is really beautiful. I'm not talented, but I also want to make a fool of myself." After that, he waved his hand at the teacups in front of him. However, as soon as the wind from his palm touched the 4 teacups, the 4 teacups immediately let out a few cracking sounds and instantly broke into pieces. The tea spilled all over the table. The cultivators in the cabin suddenly burst into an uproar. Laughter and ridicule rang out incessantly. Zhenren Li, are you serious? You can't even handle these teacups? That's right. The teacups have been broken. How can we fight? Zhou Qin also stood up abruptly and said in surprise, how could the teacups be broken? Wan Hongling, who had been silent all this time, gritted her teeth and said, shameful. It must be that when Chen Yunyan touched the teacups just now, he used his hidden force to break the teacups in Li Yundong's hands. He's too shameless. Zi Yuan frowned and said angrily in a low voice, Chen Yunyan can be considered a cultivator with great cultivation quotient. How could he do such a despicable thing? In order to win, he would do anything. Su Chan was so angry that her face turned red. She jumped up and couldn't help but curse loudly. However, when the words were about to come out of her mouth, she was stopped by Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan shook her head at her and whispered, the outcome hasn't been decided yet. Don't worry. Let's see how Li Yundong will deal with it. Su Chan glared at Chen Yunyan fiercely and sat down angrily. Li Yundong saw the teacup break and the tea flow all over the table, but he was not surprised at all, as if he had known that such a thing would happen. He laughed, looked at Chen Yunyan meaningfully, and said, Zhenren Chen, good trick. Chen Yunyan cupped his hands with a fake smile and said, you're flattering me. I'm just giving you a taste of your own medicine. Li Yundong didn't bother to argue with him. He looked around and saw a skylight at the top of the cabin. He pointed at it and said to Wan Jinyuan, Zhenren Wan, it's a little stuffy here. Can you open the window? As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, a cultivator who didn't like him immediately said sarcastically, Zhenren Li, are you sweating because you're afraid of guilt? That's right. A real cultivator should have the great willpower to remain calm even if Mount Tai collapses in front of him. Aren't you too useless to sweat over such a small matter? After that, there was a burst of laughter in the cabin. Next to Zhou Ping, the little shimmy of the Xueqi school, who had been looking at Li Yundong curiously, couldn't help but say to Zhou Ping softly, Shiji Zhou Ping, why do you think Li Yundong wants to open the skylight? Zhou Ping sneered and said, who knows? Maybe he wants to find a place to escape so as not to embarrass himself? The little shimmy made a face at Zhou Ping and said, I think he seems to have a way. Don't you see how calm he is? I feel that he is like Shi Xiang. Zhou Ping sneered and said, Shimmy, only the calmness of Zhang Tianhe of the Zhengyi school is the real calmness. He comes from a famous righteous sect and is also the descendant of Zhang Tianshi. His cultivation and kung fu are earth-shattering, and his every move has the bearing of a leader. This is what it means to be calm. Li Yundong is just a dabbler. Who does he think he is? How can he be compared with Shi Xiang? Hearing Li Yundong's words, Wan Jinyuan also felt strange. Why didn't Li Yundong think about fighting? Why did he open the window? Could it be that he was really hot because of his guilty conscience? He didn't think too much about it. With a wave of his hand, he ordered the doorman to open the skylight at the top of the cabin. Everyone saw that the skylight was only about half a meter square. An array of light came through from the outside and shone on the mahogany tea table in front of Li Yundong. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, just now, you saw a simulated heavenly tribulation. Now, I'll let you see a real one. How about it? Hearing this, everyone was stunned. Before they could react, they saw Li Yundong suddenly press his hands down. With this press, everyone suddenly felt that the yacht under their feet was sinking. It was as if the yacht had suddenly become a submarine. The hull was sinking desperately. Before everyone could panic, they saw Li Yundong smiling again. His two palms facing the ground suddenly turned into palms facing the sky, and then he pushed them up forcefully. He shouted, water. Boom. The surroundings seemed to be set off by raging waves. These waves covered the entire yacht, and the surroundings were instantly plunged into darkness. The surrounding water surged up as if it was going straight to the sky. In the blink of an eye, it became turbulent. Chris, John and Alba, who were looking at the cruise ship from afar by the river, were stunned to see the originally calm moat suddenly turn into a ferocious new river. They all stared at the rolling river. John stammered, God, what's going on? Alba widened her eyes and stammered, shouldn't the moat be stagnant? How could there be such a big storm? Chris vaguely felt that this storm might have something to do with Li Yundong and these strange people, but she still couldn't believe it. She opened her mouth wide and couldn't say anything for a moment. She just stared at the cruise ship where Li Yundong was, and there was a voice full of curiosity shouting in her heart, "For God's sake, who can tell me what's going on?" At this time, the pedestrians on both sides of the river also stopped and looked at the river in astonishment. They pointed at it one by one, and some people simply picked up the mobile phones in their hands and began to take pictures. Before long, they suddenly heard a rumbling thunder coming from the sky. They were stunned, and someone couldn't help saying, "Damn, it's thunder in winter. Only Xia Yuxue is left." Someone next to him also nodded and said, "Yes, there are grievances among the people." While the passers-by were whispering to each other, they suddenly heard a cracking sound coming from the sky. This sound was extremely terrifying. No matter who it was, their hearts would beat violently when they heard it. They couldn't help looking up at the sky with horror and fear in their eyes. At this time, the sky was dark and full of rolling dark clouds. The dark clouds were so low that it seemed that people could touch them if they raised their hands. There were bursts of lightning rolling in the clouds, like a cage imprisoning a thunder and lightning beast. At any time, the gate would be opened and the thunder and lightning inside would be released, destroying everything in the world. Looking at the terrifying dark clouds and thunder and lightning, everyone was panicking. Suddenly, there was another loud noise coming from the sky. Crack! The sound of the explosion made everyone feel like they were hallucinating. The sky was going to collapse. At this time, all the cultivators in the cabin couldn't help standing up and looking at Li Yundong in horror. They couldn't help shouting, "Li Yundong, are you crazy? Do you want to drag us down with you? Li Yundong, are you courting death by attracting the divine tribulation? Li Yundong, do you want to die with us?" These chaotic noises kept rushing toward Li Yundong like a raging flood. But then, a deafening thunder suddenly came from the sky, making everyone's ears buzz. No one could hear what the people in front of them were saying. They could only see their mouths opening and closing, and they could only hear the buzzing sound in their ears. Li Yundong laughed and said, "Fellow Taoists, don't panic. Even if the sky really collapses, I can hold it up." At this time, a bolt of lightning fell from the rolling dark clouds and struck the skylight of the cruise ship. However, Li Yundong didn't seem to hear the terrible thunder. He laughed, turned his right palm up, and suddenly lifted it up into the sky. Just as Li Yundong raised one of his hands in the air, the lightning accurately hit the top of his palm and exploded with a bang. Everyone looked up and saw the dark clouds rolling in the sky outside the skylight. They were so low that they seemed to be stuck to the window. The thunder and lightning in the clouds were raging wildly, tearing the clouds apart as if the sky would collapse in the next second. Before they had time to panic, they saw the thunder and lightning striking toward the skylight like rain. Li Yundong stood where he was as if nothing had happened. He raised his hand high, and the thunder and lightning struck the top of his head. They only disappeared 3 inches in front of his hand, as if Li Yundong was really holding the sky with one hand. For a moment, everyone was shocked. They looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape and thought, "What on earth is this lunatic doing?" Chapter 480. Go to watch net. Li Yundong stood motionless in the midst of the thunder and lightning, like a towering mountain. He seemed to think that everyone was not shocked enough. He waved at the broken teacup with his other hand, grabbed all the fragments in the air, and then threw them into the skylight. As he threw it, a bolt of lightning struck down and accurately struck the center of the fragments. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. Everyone felt their eyes suddenly light up, as if fireworks had been set off. For a moment, every piece of the teacup was shining and rolling in the air. However, before the shards could roll far away, another bolt of heavenly lightning struck the area around the shards of the teacup, and the shards of the teacup gathered together in the air. Everyone could see that these fragments seemed to be controlled by an invisible hand, which kept them from leaving the range of the skylight. Moreover, as the heavenly thunder continued to strike them, not only were they not directly hit by the heavenly thunder, but they were also stained with the spiritual chi of heaven and earth contained in the heavenly thunder. They looked as if they were plated with a layer of colorful glaze, dancing beautifully in the air. At this time, the cultivators in the cabin realized that Li Yundong was actually manipulating the heavenly thunder to strike the fragments of the teacup. He not only prevented the heavenly thunder from hitting them directly, but also accurately controlled them to prevent them from leaving the bombardment range. Compared to Chen Yunyan, this was 100 times more difficult. Ding Nan had been by Zhang Yuan's side for a long time, But she had never thought that someone could play magic so miraculously. He was playing with heavenly thunder as if it were his pet. This was too sensational. Zhang Yuan was also dumbfounded as he looked at the rolling fragments at the skylight. For a moment, he was so shocked that he didn't even have time to think about other things. He didn't even know that his beloved disciple was looking at Li Yundong as if she was worshipping a god. Wei Qing looked at Li Yundong with a dull face. She couldn't help whispering, "Oh my god! This is impossible, isn't it? How can a person control heavenly thunder so exquisitely? This is heavenly thunder. It's not caused by magic. How did he do it?" When Yu Sheng heard her words, he subconsciously said with a shocked face, "No, this is not the real heavenly thunder. The real heavenly tribulation heavenly thunder cannot be controlled by anyone. This is just the heavenly thunder simulated by Li Yundong, but it's too realistic." All the cultivators on the scene were speechless at this time. They stared blankly at the boiling heavenly thunder and the rolling debris at the skylight. After an unknown period of time, when the last bolt of heavenly lightning suddenly struck down, the fragments seemed to be suddenly pinched together by an invisible hand, and became 4 perfectly intact teacups. Li Yunyang laughed and loosened his hand that was holding the sky. Suddenly, the surroundings became bright, and the rolling dark clouds in the sky slowly went away. After a while, they dissipated, and the sky became clear again. Li Yundong waved at the 4 teacups floating in the air with his other hand. The 4 teacups obediently flew to him and lined up side by side. Li Yundong placed the 4 teacups on the tea table, held one in each hand in turn, and then flicked it gently with his fingers. The teacups made a crisp sound, and colorful brilliance flowed around them. It was really colorful and dazzling. Everyone stared at the cups with their eyes wide open. They didn't understand how Li Yundong had pinched these broken teacups together again. How did he control the thunder so accurately? The cultivators present were not fools. They were all people who knew what was good and what was bad. Naturally, they knew that Chen Yunyan had broken the teacup with heavenly thunder, and Li Yundong had repaired the teacup with heavenly thunder. Xueqi had not been in the Tao for long, so she still couldn't see through the mysteries of these fights. She saw that everyone was looking at Li Yundong in a daze. Su Chan and Zi Yuan were both happy. She vaguely guessed that Li Yundong had won, but she still couldn't help saying to Zi Yuan, "Zi Yuan, how is it? Tell me, how is it? Did you win?" Zi Yuan's face was full of uncontrollable joy and admiration. She nodded and said, "I won." Xueqi immediately raised her eyebrows and asked, "How did you win?" Zi Yuan glanced at Chen Yunyan and saw that the young cultivator was standing in the same place with a pale face, looking lost. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart and think to herself, since he was born, why did he give birth to Liang? If this person hadn't fought with Li Yundong, he wouldn't have been defeated so miserably. Zi Yuan sighed softly and explained to Xueqi in a low voice, "Chen Yunyan is actually a rare master of thunder control in the world. In terms of pure thunder control, except for Li Yundong, no one may be his opponent. Just now, he used water to attract thunder and lightning and simulated a small divine punishment in front of him. He controlled the thunder and lightning to hit the 4 cups, so the cups were smashed into powder. But Li Yundong also used water to attract thunder and lightning, and he used the mode of Dongwu City as a medium to attract thunder and lightning that was very similar to heavenly thunder. Its scale and power are many times greater than Chen Yunyan's just now. You should know that the more powerful the thunder, the more difficult it is to control its accuracy. The reason why Chen Yunyan was able to accurately hit the teacups just now was because the scale of the thunder and lightning was small. But what Li Yundong simulated just now was almost like heavenly thunder. Li Yundong was actually able to control such a powerful thunder and lightning accurately, and the degree of accuracy was far above Chen Yunyan's. What a terrifying method of thunder control. It's simply unimaginable and appalling. Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong in awe and continued, "Besides, it's always easier to destroy than to repair. Not to mention anything else, Chen Yunyan used heavenly thunder to smash the teacups and smash them into powder, which implied that there was no chance of survival under the pressure of heavenly thunder. But Li Yundong was able to repair the broken teacups with heavenly thunder, which implied that although the power of heavenly thunder was great, there was still a chance of survival hidden in it. This is in line with the principle of us cultivators transcending the divine punishment and cultivating the right way. Therefore, if Chen Yunyan is not blind, if he is not stupid, if he still has a trace of shame, he should immediately admit defeat. because the battle between the two of them is on a completely different level. Hearing this, Xueqi let out a long breath. She chuckled and followed Zi Yuan's gaze to look at Chen Yunyan. At this time, not only were Zi Yuan, Xueqi, and the others looking at Chen Yunyan, but all the cultivators in the cabin were also staring at Chen Yunyan. Almost everyone silently believed that Chen Yunyan had lost, and they were just waiting for him to admit defeat. At this time, Chen Yunyan's body was trembling slightly. He had never expected that he would still lose after exhausting all his tricks. Moreover, he had lost so completely that he had no room to argue or refute. His face was pale and his lips were trembling, as if he wanted to use all his strength to say the words admit defeat. But when the words came to his mouth, they seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds, and he couldn't say them no matter how hard he tried. While Chen Yunyan was struggling, a man suddenly jumped up from the side and said loudly, "My Xixiang should have won this round." Everyone looked over and saw that it was a cultivator from the Qingwei sect. There was an uproar and an uproar. "Do you think we are all blind and fools? If your Xixiang can win this round, I will eat all these teacups." "Little boy, don't make trouble. A loss is a loss. The Qingwei sect can't afford to lose." Li Yundong looked over and saw that this man was the disciple of the Qingwei sect who had conspired with others to attack him on Mount Tianlong. He smiled slightly and cupped his hands. "Fellow Taoist, you should tell me your name this time, right?" The man glanced at Li Yundong and couldn't help being shocked by his bearing. His cheeks turned slightly red, and he braced himself and said, "Is the name very important?" "Let's talk about the matter at hand first," Li Yundong said with a smile. "Oh? What do you mean?" The man stiffened his neck and said, "My Xixiang made a small-scale heavenly thunder, but you made a large-scale one. This is unfair in itself, and you even want to open a skylight. This is cheating. Anyway, I'm not convinced." Everyone listened to the man's sophistry, and the last sentence gave the game away. It turns out that he really can't afford to lose. Although most of the cultivators present did not have a good impression of Li Yundong, and most of them even despised and envied the leader of the Fox Zen school, who was surrounded by beautiful women, they could not lie through their teeth and turn a good thing into a bad thing. Li Yundong saw that the man was pestering him endlessly, but he was not angry. He turned to Wan Zhenyuan and said with a smile, "Master Wan, you are the host. Why don't you say something fair?" Wan Zhenyuan was shocked by Li Yundong's cultivation methods. At this time, seeing that Li Yundong was quite respectful to him, he was secretly proud. He stroked his beard and said, "This battle can be said to be a fierce one. Both sides have used extremely wonderful methods of controlling thunder. It can be said that they are both good at controlling thunder. But as the saying goes, there is no first place in literature, and there is no second place in martial arts. The same is true for our cultivation of fighting methods. If I have to say who is better, I still think that Zhenren Li is slightly better." His words were smooth and slick. He not only gave Chen Yunyan face to step down, but also made a conclusion. He did not offend anyone. When the crowd heard this, some people secretly nodded and admired Wan Zhenyuan's shrewdness. Some people secretly sneered and despised Wan Zhenyuan's way of playing both sides. After hearing Wan Zhenyuan's words, Chen Yunyan seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Seeing that his shitty was about to say something, he scolded him in a low voice, "Shitty, don't say anything. This game. I lost." Chen Yunyan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said unwillingly, "Zhenren Li, good method. I'm convinced." Li Yundong smiled slightly and also cupped his hands to return the salute. "Zhenren Chen, your cultivation and kung fu are good, but it's a pity that some of your kung fu is used in the wrong place. If you can focus on the Tao, I believe that you can continue to make progress." If these words had been said by a senior cultivator, Chen Yunyan might have had to bow his head and listen respectfully. But in Chen Yunyan's opinion, Li Yundong looked even younger than him, and he was actually scolding him in front of everyone like an old man. Chen Yunyan was furious and snorted secretly. He cupped his hands to Li Yundong with an ugly expression and sat back in his seat. Wan Zhenyuan smiled and cupped his hands to Li Yundong. "Zhenren Li, according to the rules of the Taoist Assembly, it's time for you to defend the ring. Next, you will be challenged by various sects and clans until you are defeated. But you can rest for a while between each battle. Do you need to rest now?" Xueqi, who was not far away, was shocked when she heard this. She couldn't help whispering, "What kind of rule is this?" Wasn't this making things difficult for him? Why should I always accept challenges as the champion? What if I run out of strength in the last battle and get defeated? Zi Yuan smiled helplessly and said, "Will battles are the characteristics of the Taoist assembly. If you weren't strong enough to suppress all the heroes, you wouldn't have been able to take away the prize magic treasure." Zhou Qin was stunned and whispered, "It's too cruel and unfair." Su Chan comforted Zhou Qin in a low voice. "Sister Zhou Qin, don't worry. Yundong will definitely be fine. He's very powerful now." The girls whispered to each other in private, but Li Yundong smiled slightly. He didn't answer Wang Jinyuan's words. Instead, he cupped his hands to the cultivators of the various sects and said, "Which fellow Taoist would like to come and teach me?" At this time, the cultivators of the various sects were all shocked and frightened by Li Yundong's magical skills just now. For a moment, no one took the initiative to fight. All of them were hoping that others would take the lead so that they could take advantage of the situation. Wang Jinyuan saw that everyone was silent and no one was going to fight. He frowned secretly and said in a clear voice, "According to the rules, if no one fights within the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, Zhenrenli will automatically win." When the crowd heard this, there was a sudden commotion. No one was willing to let Li Yundong take away the immortal pen just like that, but they were even more unwilling to go out first to consume Li Yundong's zhenqi, and then let the latecomers take advantage of it. For a moment, everyone just looked at each other and encouraged each other to step forward. They tried their best to carry forward the spirit of internationalism. Wang Jinyuan saw that the people of the various sects were so scared by Li Yundong that they didn't dare to step forward. He frowned and quickly glanced at Sun Baitian, who was not far away. When Sun Baitian saw that Wang Jinyuan's gaze had swept over him, he immediately understood. He slowly walked to the front of the stage and said in a clear voice, "Zhenrenli, your thunder-controlling skills are very powerful, but I wonder how good you are at the five-element Shentong?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Not bad." Sun Baitian laughed and said, "That's good. I only know a little bit of the five elements Kung Fu. Come on, Zhenrenli, let's fight with the five elements Kung Fu." When the cultivators of the various sects saw that Sun Baitian had taken the initiative to step forward to fight, they all secretly breathed a sigh of relief and became faintly excited. Li Yundong's thunder-controlling skills just now were really powerful and frightening. However, no matter how powerful a person was, it was impossible for him to be proficient in all kinds of magic. They didn't know how good Li Yundong's five-element Shentong was. Sun Baitian was an old senior of the Gazao sect. He had been a famous great cultivator 20 years ago, and he was best at fighting with the five elements. Li Yundong's thunder-controlling skills were so abnormal. There was no reason for the five elements to be so abnormal, right? Chapter 481. Go to watch net. Li Yundong looked at Sun Baitian, cupped his hands, and said with a smile, "I wonder how Zhenren's son wants to fight the five elements?" Sun Baitian chuckled. He walked to the table, knocked on it, and said, "Zhenrenli, why don't we use this table as the arena? The two of us will show our magical powers and see who has more mysterious changes. Whoever wins will win. What do you think?" Li Yundong was very curious and asked, "How do you do it on this table?" Sun Baitian took out 5 bags from his clothes. Each bag was about the size of a fist. Sun Baitian poured the 5 bags on the table. Everyone looked at them and saw that the 5 bags were filled with soil. However, the color of the soil in each bag was different. They were green, white, red, black, and yellow. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. Sun Baitian put the 5 piles of soil on the table and wiped them with his hands. The 5 piles of soil of different colors were mixed together, forming a circular 8 trigrams pattern. Zhou Qin was curious and asked Zi Yuan in confusion, "Zi Yuan, what are you doing?" Zi Yuan said with a serious face, "I don't know either, but the 5 bags that Sun Baitian took out should contain soil from the east, west, south, north, and center. I just don't know what he's going to do by taking out the soil and arranging it into such an 8 diagrams pattern." After Sun Baitian arranged the 8 trigrams pattern, half of it was facing himself and the other half was facing Li Yundong. He said, "Zhenrenli, this 8 trigrams pattern is like a battlefield between 2 sides. The yin-yang line in the middle is the battle line between our 2 sides. Why don't we use our respective divine abilities and use this 8 trigrams as a battlefield to attack each other? Whoever completely pushes the battle to the other's yin and yang points first will lose. How about it? Li Yundong looked down and saw two extremely conspicuous yin and yang dots on both sides of the yin-yang 8 diagrams, one black and one white. They were like two castles standing in the middle, staring at each other like tigers. Li Yundong laughed and said, Zhenren Sun's method is really interesting. Well, let's do as you say. As soon as Li Yundong agreed, Sun Baitian immediately burst out laughing. Good, straightforward. The cultivators in the cabin also began to whisper to each other and discuss. What kind of fight is this? Why haven't I heard of it before? That's right. How are they going to fight? Li Yundong is too bold. He dared to agree without knowing the rules. Haven't you heard of the saying, the skilled are bold? Bull **T. How old is he? Even if he started cultivating in his mother's womb, it's impossible for him to be proficient in both thunder spells and all 5 element spells. When Su Chan and Zhou Qin saw that everyone was talking about it, they couldn't help but feel anxious for Li Yundong. Ruan Hongling looked at the field. She gently pulled Zi Yuan's sleeve and whispered, Sister Zi Yuan, do you see anything? What was the meaning of this battle of magical powers? Why don't I get it? Zi Yuan frowned slightly. She stared at the field without blinking, as if she was thinking about something. When she heard Ruan Hongling's words, she said without looking back, although I don't know how Sun Baitian is going to fight now, the 5 elements battle can't escape the principle of mutual enhancement and restraint. Sun Baitian used the 5-colored soil of the east, south, west, and middle as his city and territory. The soil itself has different attributes of the 5 directions. Ruan Hongling's eyes lit up and she said in a low voice, yes, the corresponding color of the east is cyan, which belongs to wood. The corresponding color of the west is white, which belongs to gold. The corresponding color of the south is red, which belongs to fire. The corresponding color of the north is black, which belongs to water. The corresponding color of the center is yellow, which belongs to earth. This soil is originally an earth element, but it is mixed with the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire and earth, which greatly increases the difficulty of mutual enhancement and restraint of the 5 elements. Zi Yuan nodded slightly. Just as she was about to speak, Sun Baitian suddenly cupped his hands to everyone and said, Everyone, I invite you to watch a good show. After that, he waved his hand and gathered some of the soil in the 8 diagrams pattern in front of him into his palm. With his other hand, he quickly took out a talisman from his bosom and stuffed it into his palm. Then he quickly blew on it. When Sun Baitian opened his hand again, as soon as the soil particles in his palm fell into the 8 diagrams pattern on the round table, they immediately turned into clay figurines the size of a fingernail. These clay figurines had heads, faces, arms and legs, as if they were living little people. When everyone saw this, they were suddenly shocked. Some cultivators suddenly stood up and said in surprise, This is throwing soil to make soldiers. Zhou Qin was also taken aback and said, What kind of magic is this? I've only heard of soldiers made from beans, but this is the first time I've heard of someone who can make soldiers out of soil. Zi Yuan frowned and quickly explained, This is a talisman magic. Just now, Sun Baitian must have used an earth summoning magic. This kind of talisman must gather the spiritual qi of heaven and earth in it every day, so that it naturally has a spiritual nature. After a long time, it will catalyze everything it can come into contact with, even soil can become little people. Zhou Qin was shocked and said, Such a magical magic? Can it turn into something else? Zi Yuan's eyes were fixed on the field. She said, It's not impossible, but human beings are the most intelligent of all living things. If they want to change, they will naturally change the most intelligent things. Who would change something of a lower level? While the two of them were talking in low voices, Sun Baitian suddenly waved his hand again and summoned a mahogany stool from the side. Sun Baitian held the stool with both hands and exerted his strength. In an instant, the hard mahogany stool was crushed into countless small sawdust as if it were tofu. Sun Baitian grabbed a handful of sawdust with one hand and muttered something in a low voice for a while. Then, with a wave of his hand, the sawdust in his hand turned into small pieces of wood of various shapes. But when everyone took a closer look, they saw that these small pieces of wood turned out to be ladders, chariots, catapults, and other siege weapons. Everyone instantly turned pale with fright, and all of them gasped in shock. To control these small sawdust into such small and sophisticated siege weapons with one's own magical power, what kind of terrifying would control magic was this? But before everyone had time to exclaim, Sun Baitian laughed and waved his hand again. A bronze incense burner on the table next to him flew into his hand. He held the bronze incense burner with both hands, only to see that it seemed to be made of water. It deformed little by little, and after a while, it was kneaded into a ball of mud by him. Everyone in the cabin couldn't help but be shocked and exclaim, "Turning iron into mud?" Xueqi had seen Chen Yunyan use the power of his Niden to compress a head-sized water ball into a thumb-sized ball. She had thought that this was an extremely terrifying kung fu ability, but she hadn't expected that Sun Baitian would be able to knead a bronze cauldron into a ball of mud as if he was kneading dough. Isn't this too terrifying? For a moment, everyone from the Fox Zen school was so shocked that they couldn't speak. Su Chan widened her eyes and looked at Sun Baitian with a face full of fear. She said in a trembling voice, "What kind of cultivation is this? It's too scary, isn't it?" Zi Yuan said with an ugly expression, "Sun Baitian is indeed a senior of the Gazao sect. He is also worthy of being a great cultivator who was famous in the world 20 years ago. In the past 20 years, he has disappeared without a trace. I didn't expect his cultivation to have advanced to such a level." Ruan Hongling also said with a face full of fear, "Shiji Zi Yuan, do you think he's hiding something in his palm? Otherwise, how could he knead bronze into mud with such great strength?" Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes lit up and she said, "Yes, as long as there is a fire magic hidden in the palm of his hand, and fire can subdue metal. When the temperature is high, the hard metal will naturally become soft." When everyone heard this, they felt a lot more at ease and said one after another, "That must be it." Su Chan patted her chest and said with a frightened face, "I was scared to death. I thought that this person was so strong that he could knead hard bronze like it was made of mud." Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "Even if that's not the case, we can't underestimate Sun Baitian's ability. Think about it, to be able to hide a fire spell in the palm of one's hand without leaving a single trace, this in itself requires an extremely strong control over the power of fire, and one must also control this power so that it doesn't hurt oneself, especially when the bronze reaches the melting point. Not only will one not be burned when holding an object, one can also move it freely. What kind of amazing ability is this?" When everyone heard this, they couldn't help but frown and look at Li Yundong worriedly. At this time, Li Yundong couldn't help but look slightly surprised. He watched as Sun Baitian kept digging a little bit from the iron mud and then throwing it on the table. As soon as the iron mud fell on the table, it turned into weapons one after another. There were knives, spears, swords, halberds, axes, knives, forks and everything. These little clay men quickly picked up a weapon and then lined up neatly. Every step they took made a neat roar on the table, like a real army marching, giving people a sense of pressure that could not be underestimated. Especially when they walked to the dividing line of the yin-yang pattern, a clay man at the head walked out. As soon as this clay man raised his hand, the clay soldiers behind him suddenly stopped with a rumble. They were as neat as a lion that had been through hundreds of battles. The clay man at the head raised his long sword, and then the clay soldiers behind him immediately raised their weapons with a clatter. The table seemed to have grown into a forest of steel. Although the cultivators in the yacht felt that there was a distance between them, they still felt a cold, murderous aura coming at them. They were all stunned, as if an army had suddenly appeared on the table and was about to attack the city in the next second. At this time, the yacht was so quiet that even the drop of a needle could be heard. Sun Baitian looked at Li Yundong proudly and said, "Jinren Li, let's get started, shall we?" As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the clay man at the head of the 8 diagrams on the round table suddenly slash the long sword in his hand forward. These densely packed clay men let out a loud roar and aggressively broke through the dividing line of the yin-yang 8 diagrams, rushing toward Li Yundong's stronghold. For a moment, everyone felt that the round table was a battlefield, and the clay men were warriors bathed in blood. They were like fierce beasts, roaring and pouncing forward. They were murderous, unstoppable, and invincible. Zi Yuan was shocked by the amazing momentum of these little clay men. She had never seen such a fight, and she didn't know how to deal with it. Zi Yuan widened her eyes and said, "What should we do? How should we deal with it?" Vote for recommendation, previous page, return to table of contents, next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 482. Go to Watch Net. although Li Yundong had stayed in the 3,000 small worlds of the Burning Thumb Pot for many years, had read almost all the classics of Buddhism and Taoism, and had learned almost all the magic, he had rarely used these magic in actual combat, especially in an incredible fight like the one in front of him. In the face of the swarming clay soldiers, Li Yundong was shocked and quickly began to cast magic. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. Li Yundong pointed his finger at the table, and soon the mud particles on the yin and yang boundary kept jumping. Each grain of mud was constantly expanding, and soon a high wall was formed, blocking the way of these clay soldiers. However, these clay soldiers were not discouraged at all when they hit the hard wall. They quickly separated into a line, and the clay soldiers behind them pushed the siege vehicles made by Sun Baitian's magic up one by one. These clay soldiers were either in groups of 30 or 50, surrounding a mud chariot, or more than a dozen people carrying ladders one after another, pouncing on the wall like ants. Li Yundong saw that although these clay soldiers were blocked by the wall for a while, they controlled the siege weapons and kept attacking the wall fiercely. Every time the chariot hit the wall, there would be a low rumble, and the wall would also emit a faint yellow light. Li Yundong looked at the table with a frown. He knew that this wall alone could not stop these clay soldiers from moving forward. It was already on the verge of collapse under the fierce impact of the siege vehicles controlled by the clay soldiers. In particular, some small clay men climbing the ladders had already climbed up the wall and began to jump down like dumplings. Li Yundong saw that more and more clay soldiers had climbed over the wall, and more cracks had gradually appeared in the wall he had built. His brows furrowed tighter and tighter. Seeing that these clay soldiers were about to rush to his stronghold, he suddenly had the urge to slap them into mud pancakes. Sun Baitian, who was opposite Li Yundong, seemed to have noticed Li Yundong's thoughts. He chuckled and said, "Zhenren Li, we can't fight directly. We can only use magic to fight with the 5 elements. Otherwise, it will be considered cheating and we will lose." Li Yundong quickly raised his eyes to look at Sun Baitian. He smiled slightly and lowered his eyes again. His mind was racing as he tried to think of a solution. Li Yundong thought to himself, this clay figurine is originally an earth magic, and wood restrains earth, so should I use wood magic to deal with it? Thinking of this, Li Yundong quickly mobilized his liver qi. The liver was of the wood attribute. As soon as he mobilized his liver qi, his face turned a little green. He pointed his finger at the table, and countless tiny vines quickly grew on the table, binding the little clay figures in place one by one. At this time, the people who were watching the battle had already left their original positions and gathered around the round table, watching this eye-opening battle attentively. Su Chan and the others clenched their fists anxiously and looked up at the table. They wished they could rush up and help. Seeing that Li Yundong had used wood magic to trap the clay soldiers in place, they couldn't help cheering in unison. But as soon as they shouted, they saw the clay soldiers quickly waving the weapons in their hands and looking at the wooden vines entangling their bodies. In just 2 or 3 moves, they had cut the wooden vines clean, and then rushed forward quickly. Li Yundong was slightly shocked. He hadn't expected that the weapons in the hands of these clay figurines would have such a magical effect. While he was stunned, he saw that the clay soldiers had already rushed to his stronghold. Seeing that he was about to lose, Li Yundong suddenly heard Zi Yuan's voice transmission saying, "Li Yundong, blindly restraining the 5 elements is not enough. Sun Baitian originally used the earth of the 5 directions. Although these clay soldiers themselves are of the earth attribute, the earth attribute is mixed with the other 5 elements. Moreover, the weapons in the clay soldiers' hands are of the gold attribute. Gold restrains wood, so it naturally restrains your wood magic. You have to find a way to deal with these clay soldiers with the help of the 5 elements. Otherwise, you can't deal with them with just one magic." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He first quickly mobilized the earth magic and built a thick and tall earth wall around his stronghold. Although this earth wall was only as high as his forearm, it was already an insurmountable wall for these clay soldiers the size of a fingernail. After blocking the attack of the clay soldiers, Li Yundong temporarily took a breath and began to carefully think about what Zi Yuan had said before. He thought to himself, Zi Yuan is right. In theory, Sun Baitian is attacking me with 3 kinds of magic: earth, gold, and wood. How can I resist him with only earth and wood? I have to mix the 5 kinds of magic together. Li Yundong saw that after these clay soldiers met the wall he had built with earth magic, they were ready to use the same trick again. They used siege weapons and ladders, trying to break through the wall at the same time. Li Yundong saw that the wall was shaking again and again under the fierce attack of the siege vehicles. He thought to himself, is there any way to make this wall impenetrable? Thinking of this, Li Yundong suddenly had an idea. He thought, among the 5 elements, fire gives birth to earth. If I use fire to urge earth, I think the earth magic will be even more powerful. Li Yundong's mind was working fast. He rubbed his fingers together, and a burning fireball appeared on his fingertips. Most of the cultivators around him were discerning. As soon as they saw Li Yundong's movements, they had already guessed what he was going to do. Immediately, a cultivator nodded secretly and said in a low voice, "Yes, using fire to urge earth can make your own city wall more stable. Moreover, fire can restrain gold, and it can also restrain the gold weapons in the hands of the clay men." But there were also cultivators who sneered and said, "Don't be silly. Sun Baitian's clay men are also of the earth element. Once you use fire, they will also become stronger." Su Chan saw that the area of Li Yundong's territory on the round table had been reduced to a very small area. Sun Baitian's army had already arrived at the city and surrounded the stronghold. The little girl couldn't help but feel anxious, but she couldn't do anything to help. She could only stare at the small war on the round table like the others. Seeing that Li Yundong was going to use fire magic to deal with him, Sun Baitian smiled and waved his hands, summoning a water ball on the teacup next to him. As soon as Li Yundong released the fire magic, he would use water magic to restrain Li Yundong's magic. Seeing Sun Baitian's movements, Li Yundong smiled slightly and waved his other hand in the air, summoning all the tea in the teacup in front of him into his palm. He held a fireball in one hand and a water ball in the other. There was a thoughtful and focused expression on his face. Obviously, this battle was no longer simply about who had stronger spiritual power and who was more proficient in the 5 elements of magic. It was more about wisdom and strategy. Everyone saw that Li Yundong could control both water and fire magic freely. Before they had time to marvel in their hearts, they saw Li Yundong suddenly throw the water ball in his hand onto the table. With a crash, the table seemed to have turned into a swamp, and all the clay soldiers were soaked in the water. Sun Baitian frowned and threw the water ball in his hand into the air. At the same time, he quickly summoned a ball of fire with one hand and quickly took out a talisman with the word Earth written on it with the other. He threw the fireball and the talisman at the clay men on the table at the same time. The clay men were strengthened by the earth magic and stimulated by the fire magic. Suddenly, their bodies grew larger, from the size of a pinky nail to the size of a thumb. These clay figurines were originally covered in water above their heads. Now, they could only reach their waists in the water. With a shout, they quickly dug up the soil on the table with the weapons in their hands. In just a short while, they dug out one river after another, and the water on the table flowed obediently down the river. The surrounding cultivators nodded one after another and said, "Li Yundong clearly knows that earth restrains water, but he still used water to wash it. Isn't he asking for trouble?" But as soon as they finished speaking, they saw Li Yundong quickly throw the fireball in his hand at the mud wall. The mud wall suddenly burst into a blazing flame with a bang. In the burning flame, the mud wall seemed to have a life of its own and kept growing taller and taller. It had grown from the height of a forearm to the height of an arm and the thickness of a palm. For an adult, this was just a mud castle like a child's house, but for a clay man the size of a thumb, it was already an almost indestructible super fortress. Only then did everyone understand that Li Yundong had deliberately used water to attack the other side in order to attract Sun Baitian's attention. At the same time, he had used fire to make the wall taller and thicker. This was a tactic of diversion. Sun Baitian frowned secretly. He quickly glanced at Li Yundong, snorted, and said, "Zhenren Li, you can use fire but I can't?" After saying that, he rubbed his hands together, and the palms of his hands were ignited with blazing flames. With a wave of his hand, he threw the flames in his hands toward the dense clay soldiers on the table. But as soon as he moved, Li Yunyang quickly chuckled. He raised his hand, and the tea in the teacup in the cabin of the cruise ship automatically jumped up. Like a high-pressure water column, it rushed toward the flame thrown by Sun Baitian and scattered it in an instant. Sun Baitian frowned. He was unwilling to give up and mobilized wood magic again. Once again, he created a siege weapon several times larger than before and launched an attack on the Yundong stronghold. Li Yundong also reacted accordingly. He mobilized gold magic and imitated Sun Baitian's method of kneading a bronze incense burner into iron mud. Then, he threw the iron mud around his stronghold. As soon as the iron mud fell on the table, it immediately turned into a strict iron wall, as if the stronghold was covered with a layer of hard armor. Without saying a word, Sun Baitian immediately mobilized fire magic again and burned it toward the hard metal armor outside Li Yundong's stronghold. Li Yundong also immediately called water to extinguish the fire. But this time, before Sun Baitian's fire met the water, he suddenly controlled all the clay men on the table to throw all the wood siege weapons into the fire. This time, wood gave birth to fire, and the flames became extremely strong. Although water could restrain fire, because the water was too weak, Li Yundong couldn't resist it for a while, and the flames burned the metal wall. As soon as the metal wall was burned by the fire, it immediately turned red, and there were signs of softening and collapsing. Seeing the opportunity, Li Yundong immediately removed the iron wall and led the fire to his stronghold. As soon as his stronghold was burned by the fire gave birth to earth, which once again helped Li Yundong's stronghold, making it taller and stronger. At this time, the people in the cabin saw Li Yundong and Sun Baitian fighting back and forth, dealing with each other's moves. Their speed was so fast that it was dizzying. In particular, the round table was like a battlefield. It was really like a small battle, making some cultivators who didn't have time to think only feel like they were watching a magic movie. It was as if they were there, watching to their heart's content and cheering. As the saying goes, the layman watches the fun, while the expert watches the artistry. Some cultivators only felt that the battle was very lively, but they couldn't keep up with the changes of the two people to think. Some cultivators could faintly see that Li Yundong and Sun Baitian were racking their brains to use the 5 elements magic to constantly attack and defend. In particular, the two of them used the 5 elements magic without thinking, not only showing their superb control skills of the 5 elements, but also their superior reaction and wisdom. Especially in the face of Sun Baitian's aggressive attack, Li Yundong, who was at an absolute disadvantage at the beginning, slowly gained a foothold. Although he was facing a bad situation where the army was pressing on, he calmly dealt with it and thwarted Sun Baitian's attacks one after another. Not only did he stabilize his position, but he was also temporarily invincible. The cultivators in the field saw this and secretly admired him. They couldn't help thinking, if I were Li Yundong, would I be able to block Sun Baitian's attack, which was like a raging tide. Chapter 483. Go to Watch Network. Although Zhang Ling of the Zhengyi school looked down on the Gazao sect and secretly regarded Li Yundong as a thorn in her side, she couldn't help but sigh to Zhou Ping when she saw this scene. During the Warring States period, the king of Chu summoned Liu Ban and built a large number of siege weapons to attack the Song dynasty. When Moz heard the news, he traveled thousands of miles to the Chu kingdom and launched a siege battle with Liu Ban. In that battle, Moz used his belt as a city wall and launched an offensive and defensive demonstration against Liu Ban. As a result, Liu Ban changed the siege technique 9 times, but Moz easily resolved it. I didn't expect that after more than 2,000 years, this offensive and defensive battle would reappear in such a form in front of us today. What an anomaly! Zhou Ping looked at Li Yundong with an extremely complicated gaze. She said indignantly in her heart, "Master, how could Li Yundong have cultivated for such a short period of time? How could he use so many magic arts? His thunder magic is so powerful, but why is he so proficient in the 5 elements magic?" Zhang Ling also looked at Li Yundong and shook her head slightly. She said in a low voice, "This boy must have had some kind of adventure again. Otherwise, it would be impossible for his magic cultivation to improve so quickly in such a short period of time." Zhou Ping glanced worriedly at Zhang Tianhe, who was standing next to her with a serious face. She whispered to Zhang Ling, "Master, then Shidi." Although Zhang Ling didn't like Li Yundong very much, she was also a rare great cultivator in the cultivation world, so she naturally knew what was good and what was bad. It was impossible for her to forcibly describe a short person as tall and a tall person as short in front of her disciple. Zhang Ling frowned slightly and shook her head at Zhou Ping, motioning for her to stop talking. Zhou Ping immediately shut her mouth. She knew that even her master was not optimistic about Zhang Tianhe's ability to compete with Li Yundong. Zhou Ping gritted her teeth and said, "Shidi has been working hard to cultivate since he was humiliated and returned to the mountain last time. This time, his cultivation has improved greatly. He wanted to avenge his previous humiliation, but he didn't expect Li Yundong to improve even faster. I really don't know how sad he should be." Zhou Ping looked at Zhang Tianhe worriedly, but Zhang Tianhe stared at the field as if he didn't feel anything. His body trembled slightly, and he unconsciously clenched his fists. Although his face was expressionless, his eyes revealed strong jealousy and unwillingness. Just as the people outside were engrossed in this rare and wonderful battle, a small sparrow suddenly landed on the skylight of the yacht. This small sparrow stuck its head out and looked inside the skylight. After a while, a paper crane landed next to this sparrow. The paper crane and the sparrow stared at each other for a while, then turned their heads in unison and continued to look into the cabin. At this time, the battle in the cabin had become white hot. Li Yundong began to change from defense to offense. He was becoming more and more proficient in the control of the 5 elements, and his understanding of the mutual promotion and restraint of the 5 elements was becoming deeper and deeper. At this time, the round table was no longer the scene of a dense group of clay soldiers attacking the city. Li Yundong's stronghold had become an impregnable stronghold. Under Sun Baitian's fierce attack, not only was the stronghold not weakened, but it had also become stronger and taller because of Li Yundong's ingenious use of force. However, Li Yundong's stronghold had become taller and larger, and Sun Baitian had no choice but to upgrade his clay soldiers and weapons. The clay soldiers, which had been the size of a fingernail, had gradually become the size of a baby's fist. The cultivators watching even had an illusion that if the two of them continued to fight like this, sooner or later, the stronghold in front of Li Yundong would become a real ultimate stronghold, and sooner or later, Sun Baitian's clay soldiers would also become human-sized clay soldiers. While Sun Baitian was attacking the stronghold, Li Yundong also began to build his own army and began to attack Sun Baitian's stronghold. Everyone saw that Li Yundong was mobilizing his Xueqi to fight against Sun Baitian with all his might. For a moment, the clay soldiers on the table were fighting each other. On top of them, the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth were flying everywhere. One moment, Li Yundong had gained the upper hand in one battlefield, and the next moment, Sun Baitian had turned the tables on another battlefield. The two of them seemed to be fighting on a sand table battlefield. At this time, Li Yundong's Xueqi had reached its peak state. Although his face looked normal, white steam was rising from the top of his head. Sun Baitian's face changed from red to green, and the colors changed back and forth, like a chameleon. Sun Baitian saw that Li Yundong's stronghold was becoming stronger and stronger, while his own side had been attacking for a long time. His Xueqi was already a little weak, but his opponent, Li Yundong, was still full of divine light. His eyes were bright and unfathomable, as if he still had a lot of strength left. Sun Baitian was secretly shocked and thought to himself, "I've cultivated for decades, but I've never seen anyone with such a powerful and long aura. What's more, this person is so young. How did he cultivate? What's more, he is the leader of the Fox Zen school. I heard that this person has a bad reputation and is a lustful person. But how could a lustful person have such a powerful and majestic aura?" Sun Baitian was secretly shocked. He gritted his teeth and tried his best to hold on, but the momentum of the previous fierce attack was too strong and had consumed a lot of Xueqi. At this time, Li Yundong commanded his army to attack. It was really like a fierce beast coming out of its cage, like a flood opening the floodgates. In an instant, the battle line rushed back to the boundary between Yin and Yang, and his clay soldiers were beaten back again and again. At this time, the sharp-eyed cultivators knew that Sun Baitian was already an arrow at the end of its flight and could no longer hold on under Li Yundong's tide-like attacks. They shook their heads and sighed to themselves. "It's a pity that Sun Baitian lost like this. I don't know who this Li Yundong is. Even his 5 elements magic is so powerful that he can defeat Sun Baitian, who came prepared. Terrible. It's really terrible." But just as they were sighing, Li Yundong's troops and Sun Baitian's troops were fighting and colliding in the middle of the round table. Suddenly, the round table could not bear the heavy burden. With a crack, it broke into 2 pieces and fell in each of the 2 men's directions. Li Yundong and Sun Baitian were stunned at the same time. They looked at each other and did not speak for a while. Li Yundong looked at Sun Baitian, as if asking him if he wanted to continue. However, Sun Baitian seemed to not see Li Yundong's gaze. He just glanced at him and quickly withdrew his gaze, trying to adjust his breathing. Everyone saw that Sun Baitian was sweating profusely at this time, as if he had just been fished out of a water tank. Although Li Yundong was a little out of breath, his face was very normal, and there was not a drop of sweat on his body. When the two of them compared, it was obvious who was superior. Wang Zhenyuan frowned secretly when he saw the result of the battle. Soon, he had an idea and burst into laughter and applauded. "Wonderful. It's really wonderful." At this time, The crowd on the scene seemed to have woken up from a dream, and they burst into cheers and applause. Although this battle of magical powers was not as earth-shattering as the previous one, this battle of magical powers not only compared the two's cultivation and understanding of the 5 elements, but also compared the two's strategies and intelligence. This battle of magical powers was not only a live battle of offense and defense, but it was also the perfect application of military strategy in a battle of magical powers. Everyone couldn't help but be convinced by this. Just as the crowd was cheering deafeningly, the sparrow, who had been watching the scene from the skylight, suddenly spread its wings and flew up. It flapped its wings and flew into the sky. After flying in one direction for a while, it finally landed in the palm of an old man. This old man was wearing a black kimono and a pair of wooden clogs. He was Master Xinyan of the Regoino Zhenyan Tantrism in Japan, whom Li Yundong had met once in Shiyuan Temple. The old man gently stroked the sparrow in the palm of his hand with his wrinkled hand. He sighed softly and said, "Alas, I didn't expect that China, which claims to be the Great China and the Heavenly Kingdom, would degenerate to such an extent. So many cultivators had actually been reduced to acrobatics. Sad, lamentable." Standing next to him was Xinxiu, who had confronted Li Yundong before. The young monk was still wearing a famous brand suit and standing humbly behind a little girl. After hearing Master Xinyan's words, he said, "Master Xinyan, you worry too much. These cultivators have to fight secretly. How can they have any real ability?" Tachibana Wakako, who was wearing a red kimono with white flowers, looked like a cute doll. She looked up at Xinyan and said with a smile, "But Master Xinyan, I think their battle just now was very interesting." Xinyan shook his head and sighed. "Tachibana Wakako, after all, you are still a child, so you will find it interesting. In my opinion, what happened just now was simply a farce. In our Japanese cultivation world, this is simply incredible. A battle is a battle. This is a sacred and solemn matter. How can it be treated as a joke? In our cultivation world, a battle is a battle. If you don't win, you will die." Tachibana Wakako blinked her eyes as if she understood and asked naively, "Master Xinyan, do we still want to go to their Taoist assembly?" Xinyan thought for a moment and hesitated. While he was hesitating, he heard Xinxiu say, "Master Xinyan, please allow me to go to the Taoist assembly and fight with Li Yundong. It will also let these Chinese cultivators know what a real battle is." Xinyan shook his head without thinking and said, "No, we're not here to cause trouble this time." Xinxiu was greatly disappointed, but he didn't say anything more. He lowered his head obediently and stood respectfully behind Tachibana Wakako like a servant, not saying another word. However, Tachibana Wakako was a little unwilling. She pulled on Xinyan's sleeve and kept begging, "Master Xinyan, it's not easy for me to come out, and I happen to run into such a fun Taoist assembly. Let me go and have a look. I beg you, I beg you." Xinyan looked at Tachibana Wakako lovingly. He thought about it carefully and smiled helplessly. "Well, Tachibana Wakako, I really can't do anything to you." When Tachibana Wakako heard this, she was overjoyed and cheered, "Hooray! Master Xinyan is the best. Don't worry, I will be very obedient and won't cause any trouble." Hearing this, Xinyan put his hands in his sleeves and said proudly, "So what if you cause trouble? How can these cultivators, who treat fighting as children's games, be worthy of being our opponents?" After that, he burst out laughing. His laughter was like thunder, startling the little sparrow in his hand and causing it to fly away into the distance. I'm sorry, but because I don't have any manuscripts, the update time has become very unstable. I hope you can understand. In addition, there's no need to join groups 1 to 13. They're all full. If you want to join, please join group 14, 143153640. I can't guarantee when group 14 will be full. If you want to join, hurry up. Chapter 484. Go to WatchNet. When Xinyan, Xinxiu, and Tachibana Wakako decided to go to the Taoist assembly, Li Yundong, who was on the yacht, had already become the target of public criticism. Go to WatchNet. Although there had only been 2 rounds of fighting, the strength Li Yundong had shown was enough to make the cultivators of all sects deeply afraid. Since ancient times, there had been no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. Who wouldn't be jealous of the person who occupied the first place? Who wouldn't want to pull the first place down and climb up to it themselves? Dang Chong of the Panglai sect shook his head and said loudly, Zhenren Li, Zhenren's son, what a good battle. I've lived for so many years, and it's the first time I've seen such a unique battle. It's wonderful, really wonderful. However, although this battle is wonderful, there should always be a winner. Who won just now? This question hit the hearts of everyone. Putting aside the brilliance of the battle just now, everyone's selfishness suddenly became heavy again. They thought to themselves, a great cultivator who is proficient in thunder magic and the 5 elements of magic is simply a great cultivator. Moreover, the most frightening thing is that he is still so young. If he continues to be so arrogant, how can I stand up for myself? Ding Nan looked at Li Yundong in shock. She unconsciously stammered, he's too strong. How could he be so strong? Zhang Yuan's face was gloomy, and his vigilance toward Li Yundong had been raised to the peak. It was the first time he had felt so strongly that a person was such a huge and terrible threat to him. This kind of vigilance and nervousness made him not even notice the strong admiration in Ding Nan's tone. He thought that his disciple LV Fengping was groaning in despair because she couldn't take revenge. There was a trace of coldness in Zhang Yuan's eyes. He thought to himself, no, I can't let this guy get the immortal pen. Otherwise, although the world is big, there will be no place for our sects. He glanced around and saw that the cultivators of all sects were looking at Li Yundong with complicated expressions, their eyes full of jealousy. His heart skipped a beat, and a smile appeared on his face. He said to a cultivator of the Shenshao sect beside him in a tone of praise and appreciation, 500 years ago, Zhenren Zhang, and 500 years later, Zhenren Li. Good. I really didn't expect our cultivation world to produce such a great cultivator, and he's so young. Amazing, really amazing. When the cultivators next to him heard this, they couldn't help but look at Zhang Yuan, as if to distinguish whether he was sincerely praising him or not. An older cultivator of the Shenshao sect snorted and said with some dissatisfaction, Zhang Sanfeng is indeed a great Zhenren, but I don't know if Li Yundong is a great Zhenren or not, but he can't be considered a great Zhenren now. He's too young. When Zhang Yuan saw that there were indeed some cultivators around him who were not convinced and angry, he was delighted. He continued to fan the flames and said, that's not true. As the saying goes, heroes come from young people since ancient times. With such a young man, us old bones can rest assured. This older cultivator was the elder cultivator of the Shenshao sect. His name was Lu Yuqing. In terms of seniority, he was the same as Sun Baitian. He was also a great cultivator who lived in seclusion. This time, he had brought his disciples to participate in the Taoist assembly. Originally, he wanted to show off, but he hadn't expected to be shocked by Li Yundong before he even got on the stage. When Lu Yuqing heard this, he frowned and looked at Zhang Yuan with an unfriendly look. He said gloomily, Leader Zhang, what do you mean by that? Zhang Yuan stroked his beard and said with a smile, Zhenren Lu, don't you think so? Cultivators these days cultivate too quickly. We are old. We can't catch up. In a few years, it will be their world. Although Zhang Yuan's voice was not loud, almost everyone on the yacht heard him. Su Chan and Ruan Hongling had confronted Zhang Yuan face to face before, so they knew that this kind-looking old man was a villain with a vicious heart and a dagger hidden in his smile. Seeing that Zhang Yuan was praising Li Yundong like this, they immediately looked at each other. Ruan Hongling asked curiously, what's this old thing thinking? Why is he praising Li Yundong like this? Su Chan also blinked and looked at Zhang Yuan with a puzzled expression. Could it be that he sees that Yundong is too powerful, so he wants to make peace with us? Ruan Hongling sneered and said, Humph, this man is full of evil water. If you ask me, he must be up to something. How can he have good intentions? I don't believe it. Zi Yuan saw that Ruan Hongling's words were so unscrupulous and loud that they attracted the attention of the cultivators from the sects next to them. She frowned and gently stepped on Ruan Hongling's foot under the table. Ruan Hongling felt the pain in her toes and quickly shrank her feet. She looked at Zi Yuan with dissatisfaction and snorted twice, but in the end, she didn't say anything more unpleasant. Zi Yuan was a calm and low-key person, so she didn't want to cause trouble. However, Zhou Qin had just reached the Zhuji phase, so she was full of spirit. After hearing Ruan Hongling and Su Chan's words, she thought for a moment and sneered. This is a trick of praising Li Yundong openly and secretly. Zhang Yuan wants to incite the other sects to have a common hatred for Li Yundong and then attack him together. When Su Chan and the others heard this, they couldn't help but look at the cultivators of the other sections. Sure enough, they saw many meaningful gazes in everyone's eyes. There was no lack of jealousy in them. They were shocked and said angrily, "It must be like this. Damn it, it's shameful." Su Chan asked anxiously, "Sister Zi Yuan, what should we do now?" Zi Yuan pondered for a while, then said in a low voice, "It's better to let Li Yundong admit defeat or a draw. It's really not worth offending all the sects in the cultivation world for the sake of the immortal pen." But as soon as she finished speaking, Ruan Hongling and Zhou Qin blurted out at the same time, "No." Ruan Hongling said anxiously, "Shiji Zi Yuan, what nonsense are you talking about? This is the Taoist assembly, which is held once every 4 years. Do you think you can give up just because you say so?" Zhou Qin also raised her eyebrows and said, "Zi Yuan, I don't agree with you. Does a person who is too strong have to try to cover up his own light and strength? How can there be such a reason in the world?" Zi Yuan shook her head slightly and said with a wry smile, "You don't know. My master Wang Yuan Shan's. He was like this when he was young. His strength was too outstanding, and he didn't know how to restrain himself when he was young. As a result, he was rejected wherever he went, so no one wanted to get close to him and everyone said bad things about him." Su Chan was slightly shocked. She quickly thought, it turns out that Wang Yuanshan is such a person. Isn't my master the same? He is eccentric and arrogant. No wonder the two of them fell in love at first sight. It turns out to be like this. Yundong can't become like this. I don't want him to become like this. Thinking of this, the little girl suddenly whispered tentatively, "Why don't we let Yundong admit defeat? Anyway, this battle does look like a draw." Although Zhou Qin was aggressive, she was also a very sensible person. She hesitated for a moment and said, "I don't know what master thinks." While they were talking in private, Wang Jinyuan smiled and cupped his hands to Li Yundong and Sun Baitian, saying, "Zhenren Sun, Zhenren Li, in my opinion, this battle is a draw. What do you think?" When Sun Baitian, who was adjusting his qi, heard this, he quickly glanced at Wang Jinyuan and blushed. He knew in his heart that the leader was protecting his face and wanted to give him a draw. Otherwise, if word got out that he, an old cultivator who had cultivated the 5 elements magic for decades, could not defeat a young man who had only cultivated for half a year, how could he bear it? How could he face others? The cultivators of the other sects were also well aware of this. Many cultivators were unwilling to see Li Yundong win 2 games in a row, so most of them were silent about this. Du Fei and the others wanted to say a few words of fairness, but they swallowed their words because they were afraid of offending more of their fellow cultivators. Only Dang Chong jumped up and shook his head loudly. No. When Wang Jinyuan heard him speak, he frowned, but he quickly relaxed and said with a smile, "Dang Chong, what's your opinion?" Dang Chong said loudly, "In my opinion, Sun Baitian, Zhenren Sun, won this round." When everyone heard this, they were immediately surprised and looked at Dang Chong. Wang Jinyuan was also stunned. He hadn't expected that Dang Chong would speak up for him. He was overjoyed and said with a fake smile, "Zhenren Dang, what do you mean by that?" Although Sun Baitian's expression was a little unnatural, he still looked at Dang Chong curiously. He wanted to see what kind of wise opinion this guy, who liked to joke around, was going to say. Dang Chong pointed at Sun Baitian proudly and said, "Look, Zhenren Sun is sweating all over, but Zhenren Li doesn't have a drop of sweat." Just now, Zhenren Sun adjusted his qi for a long time and didn't dare to say a word, but Zhenren Li's qi was calm. In comparison, didn't Sun Baitian win? When everyone heard this, they thought, "Oh my god, this guy is saying the opposite." Sun Baitian's face turned blue when he heard this, and he was so angry that his whole body was trembling. Wang Jinyuan's face also turned purple. He shouted angrily, "Dang Chong, you've gone too far. You have no respect for your elders." Dang Chong opened his mouth wide and said with a blank face, "What's wrong with me? Am I wrong?" Wang Jinyuan was furious, but he couldn't point out Dang Chong's words clearly. Otherwise, he would directly admit that Sun Baitian had lost. In a hurry, he shouted angrily, What do you mean by that?" Dang Chong said with an aggrieved and innocent face, "Didn't you just decide who would win by working the hardest? I saw that Zhenren Sun's forehead was full of sweat. Obviously, he worked the hardest." Everyone immediately burst out laughing. Wei Qing, who was eager to see the world in chaos, also said in a low voice, "Then isn't the brick hauler the best in the world?" Du Fei held back his laughter, glared at her, and shouted in a low voice, "Shut up, don't talk nonsense." Ruan Hongling, who was sitting not far from them, heard this and said in a strange tone, "Nonsense, the coal digger is the best." After that, everyone burst into laughter. When cultivators fought, the most important thing was to be unrestrained, calm, and free. The more powerful a cultivator was, the more ethereal he would be when he used magic, just like an immortal. In their opinion, only people with low levels would be in such a sorry state. Dang Chong's words were like a slap in Sun Baitian's face. Sun Baitian snorted angrily and stamped his foot, causing the yacht to tremble. He turned around and rushed out. Wang Jinyuan was very anxious and quickly chased after him. "Shebwa! Shebwa!" But no matter how he shouted, Sun Baitian covered his face with his sleeves and left quickly, refusing to look back. Wang Jinyuan gritted his teeth with hatred. A murderous look flashed in his eyes, and his face suddenly became extremely sinister and ferocious. But when he turned around again, Wang Jinyuan's face became calm again. He laughed and said, "Shebwa left first. Zhang Renli won the previous battle." Hearing this, Zhou Qin and the others sneered in their hearts. "If you win, you win. What do you mean by that?" Wang Jinyuan smiled and cupped his hands to Li Yundong, saying, "Zhang Renli, congratulations on winning another round. Are you ready for the next one?" Li Yundong had been standing there with a smile on his face. In the face of the various gazes and private discussions of the crowd, he was like a mountain that had been brushed by a breeze. His emotions did not fluctuate at all. He cupped his hands to Wang Jinyuan and said with a smile, "I'm ready, Master Wan. But who will be the next one?" Everyone looked at each other for a while and thought to themselves, "Even Sun Baitian has lost. Can I guarantee that I will win if I go up?" For a moment, there was silence in the yacht. Only Zhang Yuan shook his head and sighed softly. "Zhang Renli is really young and vigorous. No matter what, he will consume a lot of zhenqi in 2 consecutive battles. He doesn't know how to rest well before going up." Alas! Although his words seemed to be a kind reminder, everyone's heart skipped a beat when they heard it. Yes, Li Yundong has fought 2 battles in a row. No matter how powerful he is, he must have consumed a lot of zhenqi. If we go up at this time, won't we get a big advantage? Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others couldn't help but be furious when they heard this. They said in unison, "Zhang Yuan is hateful." Su Chan said anxiously, "Zhang Yuan is up to no good. He's inciting everyone to exhaust Yundong to death." Zi Yuan frowned and said, "That's right, but I don't know if anyone will come out to be cannon fodder." As soon as she finished speaking, an elder of the Shenshao sect stood up and said in a clear voice, "I'm Lu Yuqing of the Shenshao sect. Zhang Renli, shall we have a fight?" Su Chan was shocked. Is there really someone who wants to be cannon fodder? Ruan Hongling sneered and said, "You think that he is cannon fodder, but he thinks that he might get a big advantage. It doesn't matter if he loses. Anyway, Chen Yunyan and Sun Baitian have already lost, so there's nothing to be embarrassed about. But if he wins, he will earn back everything." When the girls heard this, they all gritted their teeth and cursed. Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, saw that Li Yundong was smiling and was about to make an obeisance. Suddenly, an impulse surged in her heart. She stood up abruptly and said loudly, "I'll do it this time." Her voice was loud and sudden, instantly attracting everyone's attention, and they all turned to look at her. Lu Yuqing looked her up and down and frowned. "Who are you? Why are you here?" Zhou Qin took a deep breath, calmed down, and cupped her hands in a clear voice. As the saying goes, when the master needs something, the disciple will do it for him. Lu Yuqing was slightly surprised and said, "Are you Li Yundong's disciple?" Zhou Qin said loudly, "Yes, I am Li Yundong's first disciple, Zhou Qin. Ah. It's even later. I just finished writing a chapter, and there will be another chapter in the evening, but it may be a little late. I don't know the specific time. Don't wait, everyone. Get up in the morning and read it. In addition, Group 14 is full. Wipe your sweat. Don't join it. I just opened a supergroup of 500 people. 28092211. Everyone, please join it. If the group of 200 people is full in one day, then the group of 500 people can at least last for 2 days, right? Haha. Thank you to group owner Joe for providing a supergroup of 500 people. Chapter 485. Go to watch net. Zhou Qin's words made the cabin suddenly quiet down. The cultivators of all sects looked at Zhou Qin strangely. Lu Yuqing even raised his head and laughed out loud. The young cultivators of the Shenshao sect who were accompanying him also let out a burst of mocking laughter. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. Lu Yuqing chuckled and didn't say anything. A disciple of the Shenshao sect next to him said loudly, "You're so shameless. How can you claim to be the first disciple of the sect?" Lu Yuqing chuckled and did not say anything. A disciple of the Shenshao sect next to him said loudly, "How shameless. How can anyone claim to be the first disciple of the sect? Li Yundong is just a small leader of the Fox Zen school. How dare you claim to be the first disciple of the sect? What kind of sect are you running?" After that, they burst into laughter again. At this time, the cultivators of the other sects on the yacht also made fun of Zhou Qin's misfortune and pointed their fingers at her. Li Yundong saw Zhou Qin standing where she was, her face flushed and her body trembling slightly with anger. He walked over to Zhou Qin, patted her on the shoulder, and whispered, "Zhou Qin, we cultivators need to cultivate ourselves. We need to pay attention to controlling our emotions and temper. Forget it, I'll be fine." Yoop. But before Li Yundong could finish his words, Zhou Qin acted as if she hadn't heard him. She suddenly took a step forward, pointed at Lu Yuqing, and shouted excitedly, "Don't talk so much nonsense. Do you dare to fight?" Li Yundong was stunned and looked at his classmate and proud disciple in confusion. He didn't understand why Zhou Qin, who had always been very obedient to him, suddenly lost control of her emotions and turned a deaf ear to his words. Li Yundong was about to speak, but he suddenly felt a hand gently pinching his fingertips. He turned his head and saw Zi Yuan shaking her head slightly at him. Although Li Yundong was puzzled, he swallowed what he had said to Zhou Qin out of trust in Zi Yuan. Li Yundong didn't know that Zhou Qin could tolerate others' contempt and mockery of her, but she absolutely couldn't tolerate others' contempt and mockery of Li Yundong. In the face of Zhou Qin's challenge, Lu Yuqing's eyes showed a touch of disdain and sarcasm, but he did not lose his mind because of it. He knew that even if he won against Zhou Qin, there would be no benefits. On the contrary, he would be notorious for bullying the weak, and a man bullying a woman. Lu Yuqing snorted, sneered, turned his face away, and looked at Wang Zhenyuan. Li cupped his hands and said, "Master Wan, according to convention, can you send your own disciples to participate in the battle for you?" Wan glanced at Zhou Qin and said with a smile, "Wan Zhenyun, according to the rules of the Taoist assembly, the disciple can take on a battle for the master, but the outcome must also be counted. If the disciple loses, it will be regarded as the master's loss, and from then on, he will be disqualified from participating in the competition for the treasure. According to the rules of the Taoist assembly, it doesn't matter if I lose, but if I cause Li Yundong to lose the right to participate in the competition, it will be a big crime." Li Yundong saw Zhou Qin looking at him, and his heart suddenly tightened. He knew that Zhou Qin had lost her confidence in winning and her aggressive spirit. She began to look forward and backward, worried about personal gains and losses. When Li Yundong saw Zhou Qin looking at him, his heart suddenly tightened and he knew that it was not good, because he knew that at this time, Zhou Qin had lost the confidence to win and the aggressive spirit from before. She began to look forward and backward, worrying about personal gains and losses. Once they fell into it, if they accepted the challenge, it would be fine if they won, but if they lost, they would fall into endless self-blame and regret, which was extremely disadvantageous to their cultivation. It could even be said that if they didn't have great opportunities and great determination, they would basically become second-rate cultivators, no matter how excellent their talent was. Moreover, once they were caught in it, it would be fine if they won, but if they lost, they would fall into endless self-blame and regret. It was extremely detrimental to their cultivation. It could even be said that without great opportunities and great determination, a cultivator would basically be reduced to a second-rate cultivator no matter how talented they were. Moreover, if Zhou Qin did not accept the challenge, then her Taoist heart would be broken, because no matter when she cultivated in the future, as long as she thought of what had happened today, she would regret retreating at the last minute and fall into a demonic barrier from then on. Zhang Yuan, who also understood this, sneered. He took a meaningful look at Zhou Qin and then at Wang Zhenyuan. Ding Nan, who was standing to one side, was very concerned about Zhou Qin. When she saw Zhang Yuan sneer, she quickly asked, "Master, what are you laughing at? Are you laughing at Zhou Qin for overestimating herself?" Zhang Yuan shook his head and said in a low voice, "No, I'm laughing at Wang Zhenyuan's ulterior motives." He didn't have to say the last sentence, but he said it. What do you think his intentions were? This sentence can be said to be a trap for Zhou Qin. No matter what she chooses, it will be difficult for her to escape from this trap. Otherwise, she will fall into a demonic barrier, and from then on, it will be difficult for her to make any progress in her cultivation. Ding Nan looked at her former good sister, with a complicated look in her eyes. She bit her lips slightly and asked, "Is there no other way?" Zhang Yuan sneered and said, "Yes. Accept the challenge, and you must win. Otherwise, Zhou Qin's cultivation will be over." Ding Nan took a deep look at Zhou Qin and suddenly whispered, "She will definitely win." Zhang Yuan sneered and said, "Are you kidding? At best, Zhou Qin is just a cultivator who has just reached the Zhuji phase. How can she defeat Lu Yuqing? Do you know who Lu Yuqing is? He is the shidi of the leader of the Shenxiao sect, and his Shentong Kung Fu has been famous all over the world for more than a decade. How could Zhou Qin be his match? Hey, no matter which path Zhou Qin chooses, it will almost be the end of her cultivation. Wang Zhenyuan is really good at scheming. Amazing, really amazing." As he said this, Zhang Yuan said earnestly to Ding Nan, "Pinger, you have to study hard. Fighting is not just about cultivation and spiritual energy, nor is it about whose powerful magical weapon is stronger. You see, Wang Zhenyuan has almost destroyed a good cultivation seedling with one sentence. This is called a silver tongue, which can fight against millions of soldiers." But Ding Nan didn't seem to hear him. She looked at Zhou Qin attentively and repeated stubbornly, "She will win. She has to win." Zhang Yuan was surprised and asked, "Oh, why?" There was a strange light in Ding Nan's eyes. She gritted her teeth and said word by word, "Because she must be defeated by me." Zhang Yuan was stunned and thought, "Why is Pinger so strange? Why does it seem like she has an irreconcilable hatred for Zhou Qin?" As the two of them spoke in low voices, Li Yundong gave Wang Zhenyuan a meaningful look. Then, he turned his face and said to Zhou Qin with a gentle expression, "Zhou Qin, do you know what this battle means?" Although Zhou Qin had had a life-and-death battle with Yan Feng before, it had been a moment of life and death. If she didn't fight, she would die, so Zhou Qin had no choice. She had to fight desperately. In this case, she could stimulate all her potential. But now it was very different. Zhou Qin could choose not to fight, so that Li Yundong could continue to compete for treasures. In this case, Zhou Qin felt that it was not right to accept the challenge, but it was also wrong not to. She couldn't help but whisper nervously, "I know. If I lose, Master, you will lose the right to seize the immortal pen." Hearing this, Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh. It was rare for him to show a very intimate attitude towards Zhou Qin in front of everyone. He reached out his hand and gently patted Zhou Qin on the shoulder. Then he took her hand and said earnestly, "Zhou Qin, you are wrong. For me, the immortal pen is indeed a very powerful and important powerful magical weapon, but compared to you, it is worthless. There are as many powerful magical weapons in the world as there are hairs on an ox. Do I have to rob them all? As long as I have enough powerful magical weapons, and if I lose them, I can get them again in the future." Li Yundong looked at Zhou Qin gently, as if there was only him and Zhou Qin here. He said as if there was no one else around, "But if your cultivation falls into the devil's way here, there will be no turning back. So, for me in this battle, what I am most concerned about is whether you can defeat your inner devil. As for the immortal pen, I don't care about it at all. Besides, no matter how precious a powerful magical weapon is, it is just a dead object. In this world, how can there be a reason to value a dead object more than a living person? Haha, not to mention the immortal pen, even if all the powerful magical weapons in the world are piled here, they are not as important as you. Do you understand?" Li Yundong's words made everyone speechless for a while, especially the female cultivators of various sections. They all looked at Li Yundong with little stars in their eyes, and their eyes were full of love. Wei Qing put her hands together in front of her chest, like a praying girl. She said with infatuation, "Oh my God, it's so touching." Li Yundong is really a peerless saint. If I were Zhou Qin, it would be worth it even if I died in the next moment. Yu Sheng, who was standing to one side, rolled his eyes and snorted. Is it that exaggerated? Are you still a cultivator? You've watched too many idol dramas, haven't you? Wei Qing immediately rolled her eyes even more and said, What do you know? Is there any woman in the world who doesn't want a man to value her? What's wrong with female cultivators? Aren't female cultivators women? Although Zhang Ling and the others of the Zhangyi school had always had a grudge against Li Yundong, as female cultivators, they couldn't help but have a great change in their impression of Li Yundong after hearing his words. Zhang Ling couldn't help thinking in a daze. Although Li Yundong has been against us again and again, he is also a sentimental person. Alas, if I had half the affection of Li Yundong, why would I have to spend the rest of my life alone? The little sister next to Zhou Ping couldn't help but tug at Zhou Ping's sleeve and whisper, Shiji, Shiji. Li Yundong doesn't look like a bad person at all. How could a person who can be so good to his disciple in the world be a bad person? When Zhou Ping heard Li Yundong's words, she suddenly felt sad and looked at Zhang Tianhe with extreme sadness. She thought to herself, if my little Shidi, who is more ambitious than the sky, could say such words to me like Li Yundong, even if it was just one sentence, then I would really die without regrets. Zhou Ping sighed deeply and smiled bitterly. Little Shimmy, you don't understand. When you grow up a little, you will understand. Little junior sister blinked her eyes and nodded as if she understood. These female cultivators, who had nothing to do with them, were greatly moved when they heard this. Zhou Qin was even more excited when she heard it. In an instant, tears almost welled up in her eyes. At this moment, Zhou Qin only felt that her persistence and dedication seemed to have been rewarded. For a moment, she looked at Li Yundong with tears in her eyes. This woman, who was usually strong and indifferent, looked at Li Yundong with great affection. Tears kept rolling in her eyes, as if in the next second, if Li Yundong asked her to jump off a cliff, she would jump down without hesitation. Ruan Hongling saw that Zhou Qin was so moved that she was about to cry in public. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart. You know that she likes you, but you still say such words to her. Alas, Li Yundong, how many people are you going to hurt? Is it really true that seeing Yundong will ruin your whole life? However, Li Yundong didn't seem to see the various gazes and reactions of the people around him. He smiled, reached out his hand, and wiped the tears from the corners of Zhou Qin's eyes with his broad and soft palm. He said with a smile, as the saying goes, fighting is like using troops, and there is a saying in the art of war. Using troops to attack tactics. Attacking the opponent's heart, breaking their Taoist heart, and subduing them without fighting is the best way to fight. Zhou Qin, don't give up without fighting. Even if you lose, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is not to leave any regrets in your heart. If you lose something you can get it back. If you lose in a fight, you can win it back. But once regrets are left, they can't be made up for. Zhou Qin only felt that Li Yundong's palm was warm and soft. When his skin touched the corner of her eye, she even trembled slightly as if she had been electrocuted. His words made a warm power surge in her heart. This power quickly poured into her limbs and internal organs, making her feel as if she had endless strength. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong deeply and suddenly smiled brightly. She nodded hard and said, Master, I know. I won't let you down. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, I will never be disappointed in you. After that, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. Zi Yuan, who had been watching Li Yundong with a complicated gaze, saw Zhou Qin take a deep breath and slowly close her eyes. She knew that Zhou Qin was going to make the final adjustment and prepare to go on stage, so she whispered, Lu Yuqing's cultivation is not trivial. Zhou Qin, you fight with him. Remember not to let him set the rules of the fight. Also try to compete with him in fist and foot skills, or with powerful magical weapons. Don't compete with him in magic, otherwise you will have no chance of winning. Li Yundong also nodded in agreement and said, Yes, Zhou Qin, the space in the cabin is narrow, so it is more suitable for fighting with fists and feet. Later, you should try your best to fight him in close combat and narrow the huge gap between your cultivation and magic. In terms of magic, even 10 of you are no match for him. In terms of fists and feet, you and he are on the same starting line. After the two of them finished speaking, Zhou Qin slowly exhaled at this time. This breath shot out like a straight arrow until the couplets hanging on the cabin hit the wall and scattered in all directions, causing the pages of the couplets to rustle. Xueqi opened her eyes. She no longer looked back at Li Yundong or Zi Yuan. She just stared at Lu Yuqing, as if everyone in the world around her had disappeared, leaving only Lu Yuqing and herself. Xueqi took a step forward calmly. She cupped her hands and said in a sonorous voice, "I am Xueqi, the first disciple of Li Yundong. Zhenren Lu, please enlighten me." Although the second chapter on the 8th is a little late, please forgive me for the sake of the fact that both chapters are really big chapters of 4,000 words. Tofu. Vote recommendation, previous page, return to table of contents, next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 486. Go to watch net. Lu Yuqing hadn't expected that Li Yundong would support Xueqi so strongly in public. He hadn't expected that when Xueqi opened her eyes again, there would be no fear or worry in them at all. At this time, Xueqi had entered a state of selflessness. In her eyes, there was no one else but himself. Go to watch net. Lu Yuqing sneered secretly and was very disdainful of Xueqi's overconfidence. He thought mockingly, "A serious sheep is just a sheep. Does she really expect to beat me? She's just a little girl. If I fight with her, others will laugh at me for bullying her." Lu Yuqing snorted coldly, turned his head to Li Yundong, and said, "Zhenren Li, if you send your disciple out, I'll also send my disciple out to pick her up. Otherwise, people will say that I'm bullying the weak." When the cultivators of the other sex heard this, they laughed in their hearts at the same time and thought to themselves, "Lu Yuqing is not stupid. He knows that fighting with this girl will be unfair and humiliating. Sending his favorite disciple was the best choice. No matter what, his disciple's cultivation skills were better than this girl named Xueqi's." After hearing Lu Yuqing's words, Li Yundong smiled slightly and cupped his hands. "Zhenren Lu, I have no objection, but I don't know if your disciples have any objections? Aren't they afraid that if they lose the competition, they will lose the qualification to continue participating in the competition?" As soon as this was said, everyone immediately cheered in their hearts. Su Chan even laughed and said, "Wonderful. Yundong is really smart and powerful. This is called giving him a taste of his own medicine. Lu Yuqing wants to break Sister Xueqi's Taoist heart, so Yundong will break the Taoist heart of his disciple. Let's see what he can do." Sure enough, Lu Yuqing's face changed greatly. He looked at Li Yundong unkindly and said in a deep voice, "Zhenren Li, what do you mean? How could my disciple be inferior to your disciple?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Then you have to ask them." Lu Yuqing turned his head to look at his disciple and shouted with a straight face, "Who dares to fight?" The disciples of their sects saw that Xueqi was extremely beautiful. Standing in the field, she was slender and elegant, with an outstanding heroic bearing. As the saying goes, a graceful lady is a good match for a gentleman. Xueqi's beauty naturally attracted the admiration of these young male cultivators. A rather handsome young man stepped forward and said, "Master, I'm willing to fight for you." Only then did Lu Yuqing's face look a little better. He nodded slightly and said, "Well, you can be considered a cultivator who has cultivated to the Yongshan phase. I'll feel more at ease if you fight." When the young and handsome male disciple heard this, he was overjoyed. He turned his head and put on what he thought was his most handsome pose. He grinned and said, "Zhenren Zhou, please." Unexpectedly, Xueqi's eyes moved and looked at the male disciple like lightning. Xueqi's character was originally firm and strong, and her aura was strong and powerful. In addition, she had polished her aura and character all the way in the Himalayas to be as strong as steel. At this time, when she glared at him, her momentum was really extraordinary. Xueqi stared at him and said coldly, "Aren't you afraid of death?" The young and handsome man felt as if he had been stared at by a ferocious beast. His whole body trembled, and there was a burst of panic in his heart for no reason. For a moment, he couldn't speak. When Xueqi saw a trace of fear in the man's eyes, she immediately sneered disdainfully and said, "Zhenren Lu, it seems that your disciple is not very good." Lu Yuqing suddenly became furious and shouted at him, "You good for nothing, Are you scared out of your wits with just one sentence? The young male disciple's face turned red and he lowered his head, not daring to retort. Xueqi looked back and said coldly, "Zhenren Lu, I think you'd better do it yourself. Don't waste everyone's time." Lu Yuqing's face was ugly. He gritted his teeth and sneered, "I've never seen such an arrogant junior like you. Well, since you insist on courting death, I'll fulfill your wish." Xueqi didn't get angry. She calmly adjusted her breathing and tried to adjust her body to the best state. She said lightly, "Zhenren Lu, since you are older than me and have cultivated longer than me, we won't compete in magic. Otherwise, others will say that you are bullying the weak. How about we compete with our fists and feet?" Lu Yuqing saw that Xueqi's words were obviously taking advantage of him and was still pretending to be obedient. He was so angry that he laughed and said, "Compete with fists and feet? Humph, how dare you compete with me in fists and feet? Do you know what kind of kung fu I've learned?" Xueqi said coldly, "I don't know. I just want to know, you've been talking for a long time. Are you going to fight or not?" Lu Yuqing laughed angrily and said, Well, come on, let me see what kind of amazing fists and feet you've learned." After that, he crossed his arms and lifted them from the bottom to the top. When he raised them to his chest, he suddenly shouted loudly. His whole body shook, and a stream of zhenqi burst out from inside. The clothes on his body made a crisp sound, and the corners of his clothes fluttered without any wind. Lu Yuqing frowned and glared. He flicked his sleeves, and as soon as his sleeves touched the edge of the table next to him, there was a sudden snap, as if a sharp sword had cut a hole in the hard mahogany leg. As the saying goes, medicine carries the Tao, and martial arts defend the Tao. 9 out of 10 Taoists practiced martial arts. The cultivators in the cabin were also knowledgeable about fists and feet. They were suddenly shocked, and some cultivators couldn't help whispering, "What a strong force." Lu Yuqing flicked his sleeves and immediately showed an extremely powerful and fierce kung fu. Su Chan, Ruan Hongling, and the others all gasped when they saw this. Ruan Hongling couldn't help but ask Zi Yuan, "Sister Zi Yuan, what kind of kung fu is this?" Zi Yuan saw that Lu Yuqing was standing alone like a golden rooster. One of his hands was clenched into a fist and the other was stretched out behind him. Although he was standing on one leg, he was as stable as a pine tree, and there was a deadly killing move hidden in his posture. Zi Yuan was slightly shocked and whispered, "Oh no, this seems to be the Baji fist." Ruan Hongling was shocked. The Baji fist? Isn't Zhou Qin in danger? Zi Yuan's face was solemn as she quickly glanced at Li Yunyang. She shook her head at Ruan Hongling and didn't say anything else, but her expression was full of worry. There were also young cultivators in the cabin who had just entered the sect and had followed their seniors to participate in the Taoist assembly to watch the fun. Seeing Lu Yuqing's strange posture, they couldn't help asking, "What kind of fist technique is this? It looks so strange." An older cultivator who knew the ropes explained, "This is the Baji fist." "The Baji fist? Is it the Baji fist that Emperor Kongxi personally nominated? Tai Chi can bring peace to the world, and the 8 levels of martial arts can determine the universe?" Exactly. The Baji fist is known as the supreme of external boxing. Keske. It seems that Zhou Qin is in danger. I didn't expect Lu Yuqing of the Shenshao sect to know the Baji fist. I thought he was practicing internal boxing. Aren't Buddhist fist techniques the majority of the external martial arts? That's not true. Ding Faxiang, who made the Baji fist famous all over the world, is a disciple of our Taoist sect. The person who taught him kung fu is Zhenren Huangju, who is known as the Slovenly Taoist. I don't know what Zhou Qin can do. Can she beat Lu Yuqing? While everyone was talking about it, Lu Yuqing suddenly glared at Zhou Qin and shouted, "Come on!" After that, he moved forward. However, Zhou Qin suddenly raised her palm and said, "Wait a minute." Lu Yuqing forcibly withdrew his strength and said unhappily, "What else do you want to say?" Zhou Qin said, "Since we are fighting to the death, we naturally don't have to be responsible for killing or injuring each other, right?" Lu Yuqing sneered and said, "Of course. Little girl, if you are afraid, it's not too late to retreat now. You haven't cultivated to the level where your Yin spirit can travel. If you die, you will die like a lamp going out, and there will be nothing you can do." Zhou Qin smiled slightly, as if she hadn't heard Lu Yuqing's words. She said, "Then I see. Let's get started." Lu Yuqing took a deep breath and was about to step forward again, but as soon as he moved, he heard Zhou Qin say, "Wait." Lu Yuqing's qi had just gushed out like a flood from a sluice gate, but he had to immediately retract it. He was very depressed and shouted impatiently, "What do you want?" Zhou Qin smiled and said, "There are still some things we need to make clear first." Lu Yuqing said angrily, "What is it? Can't you say it all at once?" Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Didn't you talk for a long time before? Why are you getting impatient all of a sudden?" Lu Yuqing only felt that as a senior of the Shenshao sect, he was actually entangled with a junior here. He didn't know where to use all his strength, and a wave of anger rushed to the top of his head. He said angrily, "Times have changed. How can it be the same? What on earth do you want? Tell me quickly." Zhou Qin smiled and said, "I want to say that no matter who wins or loses, who lives or who dies, we can't continue to pursue this matter. What do you think?" Lu Yuqing said angrily, "Nonsense. Do you still want to fight or not?" Zhou Qin calmed down and stood upright. She said, "Come on." Lu Yuqing snorted angrily and set up his posture again. Just as he was about to use all his strength, he heard Zhou Qin shout again, "Wait." At this time, the people on the sidelines couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. Lu Yuqing flew into a rage and said, "Why do you have so many tricks up your sleeve? If you don't want to fight, get out of here." Zhou Qin was not angry. She smiled slightly and said, "I have to say something to my master." After that, she ignored Lu Yuqing and walked over to Li Yundong's table. When Li Yunyang saw Zhou Qin coming over, he took advantage of the cover of his body and quietly gave her a thumbs up. He laughed and said in a low voice, "Not bad. Lu Yuqing has already been provoked by you to be impatient. She will be exhausted in the end." Zi Yuan also warned in a low voice, "Zhou Qin, remember to overcome strength with softness later. Don't fight Lu Yuqing head-on. He practices the Baji fist. This kind of fist technique is fierce and explosive. It's very terrifying." Zhou Qin nodded to show that she had heard it. She picked up the teacup and took a sip, then turned her head and walked back to the field. At this time, Lu Yuqing was already extremely impatient. In his heart, even if a beautiful and delicate girl like Zhou Qin knew kung fu, it was just a fancy move, not worth mentioning at all. As soon as she touched his baji boxing, she would definitely be defeated. Zhou Qin moved her wrists and ankles on the spot and said to Lu Yuqing, "Zhenren Lu, are you ready?" At this time, Lu Yuqing was too lazy to put on a posture. He looked at Zhou Qin impatiently and said, "I've been ready for a long time. But are you ready?" Zhou Qin smiled slightly. Her right foot was slightly in front of her, and her body leaned forward a little. Her back was slightly raised, and she said, "I'm ready." Lu Yuqing waved at Zhou Qin. "Then come on." Zhou Qin took a deep breath and said slowly, "Well, okay." After that, her eyes suddenly opened, and all the strength in her body exploded like a high explosive. Zhou Qin's right foot suddenly stepped down, and with a bang, the yacht was obviously tilted. With this force, her body rushed toward Lu Yuqing like a cannonball. The people on the sidelines only felt a strong wind blowing in their faces, as if a fierce tiger had suddenly jumped down a mountain stream with unstoppable force. Lu Yuqing was shocked. He hadn't expected that Zhou Qin's sudden attack would be so powerful. In the blink of an eye, she had already rushed in front of him. If it had been an ordinary person, they might have been in a hurry at this time and been caught off guard by Zhou Qin. However, Lu Yuqing's baji boxing was a kung fu that could be used for long-range and short-range attacks. The name of the baji boxing was exactly the meaning of level 8, can reach extremely far places in all directions. Lu Yuqing shouted loudly, "Come on!" He tilted his body slightly, one hand behind him, and his 5 fingers closed like a bird's beak. The other hand was in front of him, and he slapped down on Zhou Qin's head. This was the turning back palm Chaoyang hand of the baji boxing. Lu Yuqing's punch was like a strong man waving an iron hammer, smashing toward the top of Zhou Qin's head. If it hit, Zhou Qin's brain would burst and she would die on the spot. However, Zhou Qin didn't dodge. Her eyes widened, and with a loud shout, she punched hard at Lu Yuqing's throat. This was exactly the move that she had learned from Li Yundong when he had fought with Huang Yifei at school. Go straight, attack the enemy with the momentum of a thunderbolt. When everyone saw that Zhou Qin and Lu Yuqing were about to fight to the death, They were all shocked. They stood up and looked at the field with their eyes wide open. One was an old and experienced cultivation senior, and the other was a beautiful and young cultivation rookie. Who would win in a life-and-death battle? Chapter 487. Go to watch net. Xueqi's punch was like the roar of a cannon. As soon as it was thrown out, the surrounding air seemed to be squeezed open. Like a thunderbolt, it rushed in front of Lu Yuqing in the blink of an eye. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. Lu Yuqing was slightly startled. He had not expected that such a beautiful woman would actually fight with her life on the line. Although Lu Yuqing was surprised, he had practiced kung fu for many years and had reached the realm of releasing his strength as he wished. With a thought, he withdrew his palm that was about to hit Xueqi's head, and his body floated away like a ghost. Xueqi's fist hit nothing but air. Xueqi's punch missed, and then she felt a strong wind coming from her waist and abdomen. It was Lu Yuqing who had turned around and touched Xueqi's waist and abdomen with a backhand palm. This palm didn't seem to be as fierce as the turning body flip palm or the rising sun palm from before, but the force of this palm was soft and gentle. Furthermore, it was aimed at the vital parts of a person's waist and abdomen. As long as the position of the kidney was touched, the force would immediately drill into the body and cause great damage to the kidney. Xueqi gritted her teeth and twisted her slender waist hard. Her whole body seemed to be twisted into a fried dough twist. She raised her hand to the side of her body, trying to push away Lu Yuqing's hand that was touching her waist. Her other hand clenched into a fist and hit Lu Yuqing's chest with a whoosh. Lu Yuqing sneered. As soon as his hand touched Xueqi's, he immediately turned his wrist and his arm drilled toward Xueqi's waist and abdomen like a loach. His fingertips quickly wiped Xueqi's waist. This was the horse palm of the Vajra 8 styles of Bajiquan. Xueqi felt that as soon as the other party's fingertips touched her body, an extremely cold aura drilled into her body. She felt as if she had been hit by an electric current, and half of her body was numb. If it had been someone else, they would have directly lost the ability to resist. However, when Xueqi climbed Carry Holy Mountain, she had climbed with bare hands in the ice and snow. She had been able to persist in the extremely cold conditions. How could she not bear it at this time? Xueqi suffered a great loss as soon as she fought with Lu Yuqing, but she gritted her teeth fiercely. Like an injured tiger, a strong force burst out from her body. She took a step forward and got into Lu Yuqing's arms. She raised her arm and hit Lu Yuqing's heart with her elbow. She also lifted her knee and kicked toward Lu Yuqing's lower body. Lu Yuqing was shocked. He hadn't expected that Xueqi would not retreat after being hit by his palm. Instead, she would suddenly come to him like a madman and fight hand-to-hand with him. Close combat was about momentum. Lu Yuqing was proud of his profound kung fu, and he was only a senior. There was no reason for him to retreat in front of a young man, especially a young and beautiful woman. Without thinking, he immediately used his elbow to meet Xueqi's arm. At the same time, he also raised his knee and hit Xueqi's knee. Everyone saw Xueqi and Lu Yuqing's elbow and knee collide with each other, making two dull sounds, as if someone was hammering a sandbag with an iron hammer. As soon as Lu Yuqing and Xueqi collided fiercely, he suddenly felt that her bones were as hard as steel. Although his cultivation was high, he was not a master of the Jinshin phase after all. After all, the flesh was flesh. This collision only made his elbows and knees feel like they were being torn apart. However, Lu Yuqing saw that Xueqi didn't seem to feel any pain at all. Her face was as hard as iron, and the muscles of her cheeks were twisted together like steel bars. She gritted her teeth and elbowed his head again. Lu Yuqing didn't believe that Xueqi's elbows and knees would not be injured at all, so he elbowed Xueqi's elbow again. This time, the elbow joints of the two people collided heavily, making a crisp sound, which made everyone's hair stand on end. Su Chan was also a good fighter, especially proficient in the joints and bones of the human body. When she heard the sound, she couldn't help shivering and said with a pale face, "Oh no, the bones are broken. I don't know whose bones are broken." Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling didn't seem to hear her. They all stared at the field nervously, not daring to blink, for fear that the outcome would be decided if they blinked. Lu Yuqing and Xueqi fought hard. He only felt as if his elbow had been hit by an iron hammer, and the pain made him black out. But before he could react, he saw Xueqi hit him in the face with another hammer. Seeing this, Lu Yuqing was shocked and angry. This girl is too much. How can she hit me so unreasonably? What kind of messy moves are these? No one had expected that this beautiful and cold Xueqi would use a street hooligan-like move like a headbutt. Moreover, she had the momentum of cutting off all means of retreat and sinking the boat. This headbutt came without warning and was fierce and fierce. Lu Yuqing knew that he only had two choices. He could either choose to fight hard or choose to dodge. There was absolutely no third way. After all, Lu Yuqing was old and experienced. He knew that when they met on a narrow road, the brave would win. Whoever dodged first would be at a disadvantage in terms of momentum. When young people fought, their momentum was often the strongest in the first few moves. As long as he could withstand it, Xueqi's momentum would definitely decline, and he could win the battle. Lu Yuqing thought quickly. When he thought of this, he immediately used his qi to meet Xueqi's headbutt. With a muffled bang, the foreheads of the two people collided firmly. When everyone heard this sound, their hearts suddenly trembled. Many cultivators subconsciously touched their foreheads, as if they were also in extreme pain. Lu Yuqing was hit by Xueqi's headbutt, and his body actually leaned back. He felt a burning sensation on his forehead. Lu Yuqing knew that he must have been injured. Lu Yuqing was shocked and angry. This girl actually injured me? When he took a closer look, he saw that Xueqi, who was opposite him, had also leaned back. Her forehead was also dark red, and her face was covered with blood. But at this time, Xueqi abruptly stopped leaning back. She gritted her teeth and, regardless of the blood on her face, punched Lu Yuqing in the face again. Lu Yuqing was furious. He gritted his teeth and punched Xueqi's fist again. When their fists collided, there was another crisp crack, which made a terrible sound like an iron hammer smashing a bean. Lu Yuqing fought head-on several times in a row, and the pain made his whole body tremble uncontrollably. But Xueqi, who was opposite him, seemed to have become an unconscious monster. Her hair was disheveled, and her face was covered with blood. She was extremely ferocious as she headbutted Lu Yuqing again. Everyone looked at Xueqi in the field and felt their hair stand on end. They couldn't believe their eyes. How could such a beautiful woman be so fierce and desperate? Is she crazy? Some people couldn't help but look at Li Yundong and secretly speculated. Could it be because of what Li Yundong said just now that Xueqi was so desperate? However, Li Yundong's eyes were fixed on the field. His face was calm, and there was no emotion to be seen. Only he knew that this was Xueqi's character and true colors. She would rather break than bend, and if she couldn't win, she would die. This girl was still calm and collected in the face of a gun. She dared to fight to the death on a tall building. Even in the midst of despair, she did not hesitate to jump from a tall building. She would rather destroy herself than surrender. This seemingly weak girl's body hid an extremely terrifying power. It could destroy all of her enemies, and it could also destroy herself. Lu Yuqing saw Xueqi smashing her head over again. At this time, this beautiful woman had completely transformed into a ferocious and extremely fierce bonda lamb. Anyone who was her enemy would be dragged into the bloody abyss by her and perish together with her. Xueqi's madness was far beyond Lu Yuqing's expectations and imagination. In the face of another fierce attack from Xueqi, he finally hesitated and became timid. He took a step back and finally chose not to fight head-on. Instead, he chose to avoid the sharp edge. Lu Yuqing thought to himself, it's impossible for Xueqi to maintain such a fierce attack forever. As long as she can hold on, she will collapse by herself. But as soon as he chose to retreat, an old cultivator sighed in a low voice and shook his head. It's over. The opportunity has been lost. It's impossible for Lu Yuqing to make a comeback. From now on, there will be no Zhenren Lu Yuqing in the cultivation world. A young cultivator who didn't understand asked in a low voice, why is that? Xueqi's madness won't last long. As long as we avoid it and wait for her to be tired, we can fight back and win, right? The older cultivator said earnestly, that's not right. Haven't you heard of the saying that fists are afraid of the young, and sticks are afraid of the old? If the two of them compete in weapons, then it depends on who is more skilled in kung fu. In that case, Lu Yuqing will definitely win. But when it comes to fighting with fists, courage, internal energy, and endurance will be tested. Although the time they fought just now was short, it consumed a lot of physical strength. These few fights are even more tiring than your 3 consecutive fights. Although Xueqi is a woman, her aura is extremely strong, and at this time, her momentum is full. It can be said that she is in her peak state. Moreover, she is so young, so her endurance must be better than Lu Yuqing's. If Lu Yuqing wants to fight with Xueqi, he may not be able to outlast her. What's more, the first rule of Baji Fist is that people's hearts are upright, and the next is that people who practice martial arts must be courageous. Strength and skills are secondary. Lu Yuqing learned Baji Fist by himself. If he loses his courage, his kung fu will be reduced by at least half. How can he win? The young cultivators were still a little disapproving when they heard this, but soon the change in the situation on the field convinced them. At this time, as soon as Xueqi saw that Lu Yuqing had chosen to retreat, her attacks became more and more crazy. She pushed, hammered, entangled, kicked, burst, bit, and smashed. All of them were heavy blows, and all of them were fighting with their lives. Lu Yuqing had lost his momentum and didn't dare to fight Xueqi head-on anymore. Every time he wanted to dodge, he thought that Xueqi would be exhausted. However, not only was Xueqi not exhausted, but she was even more fierce and powerful than the last. Lu Yuqing was beaten back again and again, but after all, he was strong. Although he was retreating, his feet were not in disorder at all. After dodging for a while, he saw that Xueqi's attacks were like a storm, and there was no sign of them stopping. Instead, he was a little out of breath. Lu Yuqing was anxious. He knew that if he continued to waste time like this, it was very likely that he would be exhausted to death by Xueqi here. He calmed himself down. When he saw Xueqi's punch coming, he suddenly turned around and ran back. Without thinking about it, Xueqi immediately stepped forward to chase after him. But as soon as she caught up with him, she saw Lu Yuqing suddenly turn around and sweep his elbow, like a powerful and strong knife-dragging chop. This move was sudden and unexpected. It was the knife-dragging skill taken from the battlefield. In the past, Guan Yu, the warrior sage, had relied on this move to kill countless ghosts. Those who knew what it was immediately cheered loudly. But as soon as their voices came out, they saw Xueqi's body suddenly lean forward quickly. It seemed that because she had rushed too fast before, she could not control her momentum, so she simply leaned forward to avoid Lu Yuqing's unique skill. But as she dodged, the back of her head and her entire back were exposed to Lu Yuqing. Lu Yuqing's elbow swept across Xueqi's back. Seeing that Xueqi had revealed such a big flaw, he was overjoyed. He raised his hand and smashed the back of Xueqi's head with a hammer. But as soon as he raised his hand, Xueqi suddenly turned over and kicked out from behind her head. Like a scorpion wagging its tail, she pounced on Lu Yuqing's face like lightning and thunder. Lu Yuqing hadn't expected that Xueqi, who had always fought in a rough and simple way, would use such a subtle move. He didn't even have time to react before Xueqi kicked him in the face. Lu Yuqing only felt a pain in his face and almost fainted. He immediately closed his eyes and retreated. His hands were like two closed doors in front of him, waiting for Xueqi to break in. As expected, Xueqi immediately chased after him without hesitation. She slapped Lu Yuqing's ear mercilessly, but Lu Yuqing was experienced. His hands stretched out like poisonous snakes and touched Xueqi's neck in an instant. As long as he exerted force, Xueqi's delicate neck would be broken by Lu Yuqing. But just as Lu Yuqing grabbed Xueqi's neck, he also felt that Xueqi's fingers had touched his eyelids at the same time. A chill went straight to the back of his head, as if Xueqi's two slender fingers would penetrate his eye sockets and pierce straight into his brain in the next second. Although Lu Yuqing also held Xueqi's life in his hands, he did not feel that Xueqi had the slightest intention of giving up. He had no doubt that if he broke her neck, this woman would definitely pierce his eye sockets with her fingers before he broke her neck. She would die with him. Was it worth it to give up his life for a fight? At this moment, Lu Yuqing even forgot that he was a young spirit master. Xueqi's crazy and terrible way of fighting had completely destroyed his will to resist. Without thinking about it, Lu Yuqing immediately let go of Xueqi's neck and shouted in horror, "Stop! I admit defeat! I admit defeat!" At this time, he felt Xueqi's fingertips stop on his eyelids, as if the muzzle of a gun was against his forehead. It was cold. Xueqi maintained the posture of two dragons fighting for a pearl. Her two fingers were like strong steel hooks. Her hair was disheveled and her face was covered in blood. She gritted her teeth and said fiercely, "Do you really admit defeat?" Lu Yuqing nodded without hesitation. I admit defeat. At this time, the ferocious expression on Zhou Qin's face slowly faded. She withdrew her hand and let out a long breath. Her eyes swept around sharply and she said loudly, "My master is not a great grandmaster today, but he will definitely be one in the future. Who else dares to question my identity as the first disciple of the sect? Come out and speak." Only then did everyone understand that Zhou Qin was so fierce and desperate just to seek justice for Li Yundong and herself. However, for the sake of justice, for the sake of a few words of contempt, was it worth it to risk his life so fiercely? For a moment, all the cultivators in the cabin looked at Zhou Qin in a daze. No one answered her, and no one took a step forward. Zhou Qin stood proudly in the field, looking down at the crowd and shouting 3 times in a row. Seeing that no one responded, she slowly walked toward Li Yundong. Zhou Qin walked to Li Yundong's side, and her ferocious face suddenly became gentle and affectionate. She broke into a smile and said softly, "Master, I didn't embarrass you, did I?" Li Yundong's eyes were fixed on Zhou Qin, and his heart was filled with mixed feelings. He nodded slowly and said, "No, you are very good, very good." Zhou Qin smiled brightly. Everyone felt that the fierce aura of this woman had disappeared. In an instant, the blood-stained steel knife had turned into a blood-stained peony. Her beauty was sad, and her appearance was peerless. After Zhou Qin smiled, her body suddenly tilted and fell softly toward Li Yundong. Only then did everyone know that Zhou Qin was already an arrow at the end of its flight. She had held on until now with one breath. The cultivators of all sects sighed. Du Fei of the Chuanjian Dragon sect shook his head and sighed. After this battle, all the cultivators in the world will know Zhou Qin's reputation for being iron-blooded and brave. They will all know that Li Yundong has such a disciple who can't be easily taught. From now on, no one will dare to look down on Li Yundong, and no one will dare to look down on Zhou Qin, a cultivator who has just entered the sect. Chapter 488. Go to watch net. He took 2 steps forward and hugged her. He mobilized his zhenqi to scan her body and was shocked. The qi in her body was in a mess, and the bones in her elbows, knees, and fists were broken beyond recognition. Li Yundong took a deep breath, narrowed his eyes, and gave Lu Yuqing an unfriendly look. He saw that Lu Yuqing was standing there in a daze. Ever since he had said that he would admit defeat, she had lost her spirit. He had been standing there like a walking corpse, motionless, as if he was extremely regretful. Why didn't I persist a little longer? Li Yunyang knew that Lu Yuqing's Taoist heart had been broken. From now on, his cultivation was over. The anger in his heart dissipated a lot. He sighed slightly and gently wiped the blood from her face with his hand. "Does it hurt?" Zhou Qin forced a smile. The sharp pain in her body made her unable to speak for a while. At this time, the qi in her body was still very strong, but her body was too seriously injured. Especially after the fierce head-on collision, her bones had been severely damaged. Watch net. Seeing this, Zi Yuan hurriedly stepped forward and reached out to take the pulse on Zhou Qin's wrist. She took a breath, and the nervous expression on her face suddenly relaxed a lot. She let out a breath and said softly, "Fortunately, there is no danger to her life. It's just that many of her bones are broken." After that, Zi Yuan asked Zhou Qin in a low voice, "How do you feel?" Zhou Qin's lips trembled as she forced a smile and said, "I'm okay, just a little dizzy." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Fool, if you hit him with your head like that, it would be strange if you didn't faint." He turned around and said to Su Chan, who was looking at Zhou Qin with concern, "Chaner, will you take Zhou Qin to see a doctor?" Before Su Chan could speak, she saw Zhou Qin struggling to stand up. She rushed to shout, "No!" Her shout immediately affected her injuries, and she almost fainted from the pain. Li Yundong quickly pressed her shoulder and said, "Don't move. What else do you want to do with your injuries?" Zhou Qin grabbed Li Yunyang's clothes tightly with one hand and said with a pleading face, "Master, don't let me leave. I'm fine. Let me watch from the side, okay?" Li Yundong glanced at Zi Yuan with a wry smile, wanting to ask for her opinion. Zi Yuan knew that Zhou Qin was born stubborn. She sighed softly and nodded slightly. "It's okay. Let her stay here. Her internal organs are not injured, and her meridians are not damaged. As long as she doesn't exercise strenuously, it will be fine." Li Yundong sighed and helplessly helped Zhou Qin to the side of the table. He let Su Chan hold her gently and said, "Well, I can't do anything to you. Just watch from the side." Zhou Qin's face lit up with joy and she stopped talking. She looked at Li Yundong quietly from the side. She sat like a peony, quiet and beautiful, making it impossible for people to associate the fierce madman just now with her. When everyone saw Li Yundong and Zhou Qin talking as if there was no one else around, they were all shocked by Zhou Qin's ferocity. For a moment, they didn't say anything to provoke them. Even Wang Jinyuan looked at Zhou Qin in surprise and thought, Li Yundong has such a disciple. This is really like adding wings to a tiger. In time, Zhou Qin will definitely become a great person. Why don't I have such a disciple? Damn it! Thinking of this, Wang Jinyuan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said, "Jinren Li, your Fox Zen school has won 3 games in a row. Do you want to continue?" Li Yundong smiled slightly. "Of course. I wonder which fellow Taoist would like to give me some advice?" The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other for a moment. They were still immersed in the strong shock and impact that Zhou Qin had brought them, and some of them couldn't come to their senses. Moreover, Li Yundong had rested for a while, so at this time, he was already full of breath and spirit. If they went on stage again, wouldn't it be like helping others? The cultivators of the various sects turned their heads to look at the few people who were recognized as the strongest in the field and had a grudge against Li Yundong at the same time. But at this time, Zhang Tianhe of the Zhengyi school looked down at the ground, as if there was a flower growing there. Wang Lingfei looked down at his slender and delicate hands, as if he was admiring a peerless treasure. Yu Shang of the Chuanjin dragon sect closed his eyes, as if he had fallen asleep. Zhang Tsuani, who had said that he would win first place, was drinking tea slowly, as if he was on vacation. For a moment, everyone cursed in their hearts. Damn it, he was so arrogant at first, but now he's scared? Zhang Tianhe, Wang Lingfei, Yu Shang, and Zhang Tsuani seemed to know what everyone was thinking. They looked at each other at the same time, and then they went back to their own things, looking at the floor and drinking tea. Seeing that there was going to be an awkward silence, Wang Jinyuan laughed again and said, "Zhenren Li, congratulations on accepting a good disciple. Unfortunately, there is only one. If there is another such good disciple, I'm afraid the Taoist assembly will no longer be held. I'll just give you the prize directly, haha." Wang Jinyuan spoke in a heroic manner, and his words were full of praise for Li Yundong. But only Zhou Qin and other scheming people knew that Wang Jinyuan's words had no good intentions. His subtext was to tell everyone that Li Yundong only had one disciple who could fight, and now he was useless and couldn't go on stage again. As long as everyone took turns to fight, Li Yundong wouldn't be able to withstand it even if he was made of iron or a bronze Luohan. Zhou Qin looked at Wang Jinyuan deeply and thought, this Master Wan has always been hiding needles in his words and secretly stirring up trouble. What does he want to do? Is he trying to balance the situation, or is he specifically targeting Master? If he is trying to balance the situation, then he must want to use the immortal pen to weaken the strength of the cultivators of various sections. If he is targeting Master, then... For a moment, Zhou Qin was so lost in her thoughts that she forgot the pain in her body. She could understand this problem, and most of the cultivators present were not stupid. They could more or less understand this. Therefore, when Wang Jinyuan said this, there was still silence. Everyone just laughed, but no one stepped forward. Seeing this, Wang Jinyuan sighed and cupped his hands to Li Yundong. "Zhenren Li, I admire you. Ever since Zhenren Luo Gongyuan and Zhenren Yi Fashion established the Taoist assembly in the Tianbao years, there has never been a young cultivator like you who has won first place in the world. Today, you've created a new record." After that, he waved to his subordinates and shouted, "Bring me the immortal pen." When the crowd heard this, they immediately pricked up their ears. What? Li Yundong won just like that? Dang Chong, who had been joking, shouted in surprise, "The Taoist assembly is over? It can't be. The last one took 3 days and 3 nights to decide the winner." Wang Jinyuan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said to the crowd with a smile, "Zhenren Li's magical power is amazing, and he is good at fighting. He also has a good disciple. No one is willing to go forward to fight with him, so he naturally won. Haha, Zhenren Li is really a young hero. I admire you, really admire you. From the looks of it, from today onwards, you will be the #1 young cultivator in the world." When everyone heard this, their hearts suddenly surged. It's one thing to go on the stage or not, but it's absolutely impossible for the Taoist assembly to end like this and let Li Yundong take away the immortal pen so easily. Zhang Tianhe, Wang Lingfei, Yu Shang, and Zhang Xueqi, who had originally stayed out of the matter, suddenly opened their eyes wide. As if they had a tacit understanding, they stood up and shouted at the same time, "I'll do it." Everyone was shocked, and then they all became excited. Well, either none of us go on the stage, or all of us go on the stage together. Well, these four are the best of the younger generation in the cultivation world. If they go on the stage, they should be able to suppress Li Yundong. Xueqi School was determined to re-establish its position as the hegemon of the cultivation world, so they were very unwilling to see a powerful cultivator lead a crooked path to win the first prize of the Taoist assembly. The other sects were even more unwilling to see a notorious sect suddenly rise, because it indirectly affected their interests. Why can the Fox Zen School shine so brightly? What right do they have to suppress us? People fight for their dignity, and Buddhas fight for their incense. No one would think that they were inferior to others, especially cultivators. Zhang Tianhe, Wang Lingfei, Yu Shang, and Zhang Xueqi stood up at the same time and spoke at the same time. They were also stunned and looked at each other. Then they snorted and turned their faces away, looking down on each other. Seeing that he had finally provoked these four people, Wan Jinyuan was overjoyed. He smiled and said to them, "Well, you are indeed the descendants of a famous family. You have courage. I just don't know which Zhenren will go on stage first." Zhang Tianhe and the other three looked at each other. There was a hint of wariness in their eyes, but they all remained silent. Wan Jinyuan had an idea and said, "How about drawing lots?" When everyone heard this, they were immediately happy and said with a smile, "Master Wan, that's a good idea. Let's do it this way." These cultivators didn't want to go on stage anyway, so they followed suit and made a ruckus. Zhang Tianhe and the others were a little embarrassed and froze on the spot. As a Sichuan native, Zhang Xueqi had always had the character of, "I am the best in the world." He was the first to say loudly, "Okay, Master Wan, let's do it this way." As soon as he spoke, the other three had to speak up. Wan Jinyuan was overjoyed and immediately asked someone to bring him a ball of paper. After he finished writing, he asked someone to bring an airtight jar and threw the note into it. He said with a smile, "You four, please. Don't use your magic, or it will be regarded as cheating and you will be disqualified." Zhang Tianhe was a gentle person. He smiled slightly and did not speak. He took the lead and reached into the jar to find a note. He opened it and saw that there was no word on it. Wan Jinyuan smiled and said, "Congratulations, Zhenren Zhang." Zhang Tianhe drew a blank piece of paper and breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. But as soon as he let out a sigh of relief, he suddenly became vigilant. Why did I feel like I had been pardoned when I didn't draw the first piece of paper? Am I really afraid of Li Yunyang? Zhang Tianhe's face darkened for a moment and he shouted in his heart, "No, this is impossible. I am stronger than him, much stronger than him." Zhang Xueqi of the Qingqing sect then came to draw the note. He looked strangely at Zhang Tianhe, who was standing to one side, but he didn't think too much about it. He reached out and also drew a piece of paper. Everyone saw that both of them had drawn a piece of paper, so the next person to go on stage would either be Yu Shang or Wang Lingfei. Wang Lingfei narrowed his eyes slightly and said to Yu Shang, "Zhenren Yu, you go first." Yu Shang snorted and said, "It's just a 50% chance. Let's fight. What's there to be afraid of?" After that, he stopped touching the note and said loudly, "I'll go this time." Everyone immediately cheered. "Good job, Zhenren Yu." Li Yunyang smiled slightly and cupped his hands to Yu Shang. "Zhenren Yu, we're going to fight again. I wonder what we're going to compete in this round?" Yu Shang walked into the field unhurriedly, cupped his hands, and said, "Zhenren Li, I admire your powerful magic and powerful magical weapons. I admit that I am inferior to you. Therefore, I want to compete with you in Yang spirit and see whose Yang spirit is more powerful. What do you think?" Li Yunyang laughed and said, "I dare not disobey." Everyone was overjoyed when they heard this. They all knew that in a fight, only a fight between Yang spirits consumed the most zhenqi. Often, after a fight, a cultivator's zhenqi would be almost exhausted, and there would not be much left. Li Yundong had agreed to fight with Yu Shang for Yang spirits, so wouldn't he be exhausted to death? Even if he won, he would definitely suffer a great loss in the next round. At that time, wouldn't it be a great advantage for them to go up? For a moment, everyone was thinking about all kinds of tricks. Wang Junyuan looked at the field in the cabin. At this time, the field had been messed up by Xueqi and Lu Yuqing. He smiled and said, "Wait for me to get someone to clean up the field, and then the two of you can fight again. How about that?" As soon as he finished speaking, a disciple of the Gazao sect suddenly ran in a hurry and whispered something in Wang Junyuan's ear. When Wang Junyuan heard this, his face suddenly changed and he shouted sternly, "How could such a thing happen? Who are they?" If nothing unexpected happens, there should be another round in an hour and a half. See. Chapter 489. Go to watch net. The disciple of the Gazao sect, who had come to inform them, whispered a few words in Wang Junyuan's ear. Wang Junyuan said angrily, "What are you doing? Didn't you get through to them in advance?" The disciple muttered in a low voice with an aggrieved expression, "We did get through to them, but it seems that a few new policemen have come this time. Go to watch net." 7K. OM. When Wang Junyuan heard this, he suddenly felt a headache coming on. He knew that a new official had to be careful. This kind of new policemen liked to cause trouble the most, and they could often stir up trouble. There were so many cultivators here, so they were not afraid of these policemen. However, the cultivation world had never liked to deal with this kind of judicial department. The fact that the police had come to the Taoist assembly hosted by the Gazao sect really made Wang Junyuan lose face. When the crowd heard the conversation between Wang Junyuan and his disciple, they all burst into an uproar. They said at once, "Master Wang, what are you doing? Why are the police here?" Wang Junyuan cupped his hands with a wry smile and said, "Fellow Taoists, don't be impatient. This must be an accident. Just explain it clearly." Someone said in a strange tone, "Explain? How? If you want to explain, you can do it yourself. We won't accompany you." That's right. If the police can come now, who else can come later? Seeing that the crowd was making a ruckus, Wang Junyuan stretched out his hands and said loudly, "Everyone, be quiet, be quiet. I already have a plan to deal with it." When the crowd heard this, they temporarily quieted down and looked at Wang Junyuan with unfriendly eyes. As long as they were dissatisfied with what he said, they would immediately curse him. Wang Junyuan said loudly, "I have already prepared a good and quiet place in the mysterious temple. I originally wanted to let all of you go and have a look tomorrow, but I didn't expect such a thing to happen today. Why don't we all go together? What do you think?" The cultivators on the boat looked at each other. They were very unhappy, but there was nothing they could do. They hesitated for a moment, and sure enough, they heard the sound of an alarm coming from outside. They suddenly burst into an uproar and could only nod helplessly. Wang Junyuan smiled and cupped his hands at the crowd. "Everyone, let's go to the mysterious view. I will send a disciple there to lead the way." Zhang Ling of the Zhangyi school took the lead and walked out of the boat. Then, the other disciples of the Zhangyi school also walked out in a line. The cultivators on the yacht shouted and followed them one after another. Su Chan widened her eyes and said, "No way. How did the Taoist assembly end up like this?" Ruan Hongling also didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, "Why is it like an underground meeting? What is going on?" Li Yundong smiled and said to the two of them, "Well, don't say any more. Since everyone is going, let's go." He turned his head and whispered to Zhou Qin, "Can you move?" Zhou Qin smiled gently and nodded. Not bad. After that, she struggled to stand up. As soon as she moved, she immediately felt a sharp pain in her body. She couldn't help but frown. Li Yundong sighed and said, "Don't try to be brave. Forget it. I'll carry you there." As he said this, he put Zhou Qin on his back and said to Zi Yuan with a smile, "Zi Yuan, where is the mysterious view?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Do you really think I know everything? Do you think I know everything?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Is there anything in the world that you don't know?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "There is no end to learning. There are many things that I don't know. But coincidentally, I happen to know where the mysterious view is." Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, interrupted proudly, "My Shiji Zi Yuan knows everything about astronomy and geography. She will definitely know such a small thing." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then please lead the way, Zhenren Zi Yuan." The group of people chatted and laughed as they got out of the yacht. At this time, as soon as they got out of the yacht, they saw a few police cars parked on the side of the road at the dock. Several young policemen in uniforms shouted at the Taoist priests who had rushed out of the yacht, "Hey, stop, all of you!" However, these cultivators all had unique skills. They laughed and didn't walk very fast, but with a few steps, they left the policemen far behind. When Li Yundong and the others came out, the policemen turned their heads and saw a young and handsome man leading a group of stunning beauties out of the yacht. They had never seen so many stunning beauties appear in front of them, and they were all stunned. A policeman looked at them for a while, then turned to his superior and asked, "Captain Zhang, what should we do?" The captain, surnamed Zhang, scratched his hair and said angrily, "Damn it, let's go up and arrest them first. We'll take them back and ask them slowly." The policeman immediately stepped forward excitedly and shouted, "Stop." Li Yundong turned his head and smiled. He said to Zi Yuan and the others, "Let's compete and see who can run faster. What do you think?" Except for Xueqi, who was lying quietly on the Yundong's back, all the girls laughed and jumped forward. In a few moments, they had disappeared without a trace. When the policemen saw these beautiful women disappear in a few leaps like chivalrous heroes, they immediately stopped in their tracks and stood there dumbfounded. They were dumbfounded and speechless. Only Li Yundong was still standing there with Xueqi on his back. He smiled at them and said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Captain Zhang seemed to wake up from a dream and said, "Someone called the police and said that you were holding an illegal assembly." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Who called the police?" Captain Zhang's face became serious and he said with a dignified expression, "I can't tell you this. You should go back with us first. It will be fine after we explain it clearly." Li Yundong was not stupid. Everyone had left, and he was the only one left. Wouldn't he be a scapegoat if he stayed? He laughed and said, "Forget it, I'll go to your place for tea another day. I still have something to do here, so I'll go first." Captain Zhang was anxious and shouted, "Stop, don't go." After that, he shouted at his subordinates, "Why are you standing there? Go and catch him." The policeman seemed to wake up from a dream and quickly rushed forward. Li Yundong didn't want to be entangled with them. He laughed and carried Xueqi on his back. With a few leaps, he jumped from one side of the moat to the other and then went far away. This time, the policemen were stunned. They stood by the river and their eyes almost fell out. Damn, is he shooting a movie? Is it that exaggerated? At this time, Chris, John, Alba, and the others, who had been standing in the distance, were also staring at Li Yundong's figure with their mouths agape. The three foreigners looked at each other, and Alba said, "Am I seeing things? He just jumped from one side of the moat to the other?" John stammered, "It seems so. God, he is carrying an adult on his back. Although it is a woman, but it is also an adult woman. How did he jump over?" Chris's eyes widened. Once again, she saw a kind of inhuman power in this young man, which confirmed what her grandmother had once said to her. There were some mysterious people in this world, and they had mysterious and powerful powers. Alba's face turned pale. If he goes to the Olympic Games, I guess he can win all the gold medals in track and field events, right? Chris didn't know why, but she sighed softly and said, "My grandmother is right. China is really a place with hidden talents. I don't know how many strange people are hiding among the people." Alba stared at her and said, "Why don't they come out to win glory for our country and serve our country? Don't Chinese people pay the most attention to contributing to their country?" Chris shook her head and said, "They are very special. We can't measure them with ordinary people's thinking." Alba thought for a moment and nodded. "That's true. That Li Yundong is a male chauvinist bastard." John said with a sad face, "Ladies, the question now is, what should we do next?" Chris frowned and said, "Let's follow them and see what's going on." John smiled bitterly and said, "But how? Who are you going to follow?" At this time, the three foreigners looked at each other and found that almost all the people on the yacht had run away. How could they still be seen on the street? On the opposite side of the road from Chris, Xinyan, Shinsu, and Tachibana Wakako were looking at this scene in surprise. Tachibana Wakako said innocently, "Master Xinyan, why are they running? Is it because they know that we are coming?" Xinyan didn't say anything. He just looked at the policemen who were in a daze with a strange look. However, Shinsu sneered and said, "These useless Chinese cultivators were scared away by a few unarmed policemen." Tachibana Wakako said with a disappointed face, "Ah? Then won't we be able to watch the fun?" As she said this, she reached out to pull Xinyan's sleeve and begged, "Master Xinyan, what should we do?" Xinyan thought for a moment, then waved his hand. After a while, a sparrow fell from his palm. He muttered a few incantations, then shook his arm, and the sparrow flew into the air with a whoosh. Xinyan turned to Tachibana Wakako and said with a smile, "Don't worry, Tachibana Wakako. It won't be long before we find them. These Chinese cultivators are too ridiculous." They were actually driven away by a few policemen to change places for a Taoist assembly. Hee, it's really incredible and ridiculous. Just as the sparrow sent out by Xinyan was flying in the air, Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and the others had already gathered together again. The group soon arrived in front of the mysterious temple on Guanqian Street in Dongwu City. Li Yundong saw that Guanqian Street was a bustling commercial pedestrian street, but there was an antique Taoist temple in the depths of the pedestrian street. The Taoist temple was full of incense, and there were many tourists. He asked curiously, "Is this the place?" Zi Yuan nodded and said, "Yes, this is the mysterious temple. Because this street is in front of the mysterious temple, it is also called Guanqian Street." As soon as she finished speaking, a person suddenly came over from the side of the road and asked them, "Excuse me, are you Zhenren Li Yundong and Zhenren Zi Yuan?" Li Yundong turned his head and saw a young man dressed no different from an ordinary person talking to him. He asked curiously, "Are you from the Gazao sect?" The young man smiled slightly and said, "Zhenren Li, please forgive me for not showing Taoist etiquette in the busy market, so as not to attract people's attention. Our sect master ordered me to meet you here. Please come with me." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Well, lead the way." The group of people slowly followed behind the young man. Li Yundong looked around carefully and saw that although there were fashionable and famous shops everywhere on the pedestrian street, none of the shops were tall. The tallest one was no more than 5 floors, and the overall building still maintained a classical charm. In particular, the young man took them through a few detours from the mysterious temple and came to a narrow alley paved with bluestones. There were classical garden buildings with white walls and black tiles everywhere, making people feel as if they had stepped into a quiet and elegant paradise from the noisy world of mortals. Li Yundong couldn't help but ask curiously, "There's actually such a place in the busy city of Dongwu, where every inch of land is worth gold. Are they all from the Gazao sect, or are they borrowed?" The young man leading the way smiled slightly and said proudly, "Our sect master has several gardens in Dongwu City. This is just one of them." Li Yundong turned to Zi Yuan and whispered, "Is the Gazao sect so rich?" Zi Yuan also whispered, "External alchemy is the richest of all the cultivation sects in the world, because they make a living by selling medicine. Haven't you heard of the saying, in addition to robbing, they also sell medicine? The most profitable business in the world is robbery and selling medicine." Li Yundong secretly sighed and said, "That's true, and selling medicine is a legal robbery." The group of people followed the young man for a few more steps. The young man suddenly stopped in front of a round arched wooden door and said with a smile, "We're here. Zhenren Li, Zhenren Zi Yuan, please come in." As he spoke, he walked to the door, pushed it open, and respectfully invited Li Yundong and the others in. Li Yundong carried Zhou Qin on his back and led Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others in. Li Yundong looked around and saw that he was in an elegant garden with flowers in full bloom. He was surrounded by grass, green trees, rockery, and strange rocks. In front of him was a gravel path paved with cobblestones, and in the distance was a long corridor with red pillars and white walls. It was full of antique, poetic, and picturesque scenery. What was even rarer was that there was a faint melodious sound of pingtan singing from the depths of the garden. A delicate female voice was softly singing a song in the dialect of Dongwu. For a moment, Li Yundong and the others were stunned. Seeing such a beautiful scene, Li Yundong couldn't help sighing. It's said that the gardens of Jiangnan are the best in the world, and the gardens of Dongwu are the best in Jiangnan. They really deserve their reputation. Master Wan really knows how to live a good life. Su Chan couldn't help but say with a leisurely and yearning expression, "Yundong, when can we live in such a garden?" Li Yundong smiled and pinched the tip of the girl's nose. "Okay, but even if we have a garden, who will sing songs for me?" Su Chan pointed to herself with a smile and said, Me, I can sing. Li Yundong laughed and said, You can sing songs? That's rare. Sing one for me when we go back. Li Yundong and Su Chan always flirted with each other regardless of the occasion. Zi Yuan looked helplessly at the young man who was leading the way. She smiled apologetically and said, We can go in by ourselves. There's nothing for you to do here. The young man nodded with a smile and turned to leave. Ruan Hongling looked at his figure with a strange look in her eyes. When Li Yundong saw this, he couldn't help laughing and said, What's wrong? Are you dumbfounded when you see a handsome guy? Ruan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. What? I just think this guy is a little strange. Li Yundong smiled and said, What's so strange about it? Ruan Hongling said curiously, It's the first time I've seen a man suddenly see so many beautiful women, and he can look normal without feeling surprised or dazed at all. Li Yundong laughed and said, You're beating around the bush to praise yourself, aren't you? Ruan Hongling snorted and said, Bah, you can't spit out ivory from a dog's mouth. Don't be so long-winded. Let's go. Li Yundong smiled and led the way. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others admired the unique arrangement of flowers and plants in the garden and couldn't help but sigh. Only Ruan Hongling was thinking about what had just happened. The more she thought about it, the more strange she felt. For a moment, she unconsciously fell behind the group. When she reached the corner of a long corridor, Ruan Hongling suddenly felt as if someone was watching her. She turned her head and saw a figure quickly flash into the corner. Although it was fast, Ruan Hongling still recognized the person. She was shocked and wondered, why does this figure look so much like Xueqi, Sherbo of the Fox Zen School? See. Chapter 490. Go to watch net. Ruan Hongling only glanced at him for a moment. When she looked again, this person had already disappeared without a trace. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. After walking for a while, Li Yundong found that someone was missing. He looked back and saw that Ruan Hongling was looking behind him. He asked curiously, Ruan Hongling, what are you looking at? Ruan Hongling turned her head and said with a bewildered expression, I think I saw someone just now. Li Yundong smiled and said, How refreshing. There are so many people here. Don't you see? The little foxes next to him laughed. Ruan Hongling said anxiously, No, I think I saw Xueqi of the Fox Zen School. What? This time, the little foxes couldn't laugh anymore. Their eyes widened. Sherbo Xueqi? Where is she? Li Yundong frowned and asked in a deep voice, Are you sure? Ruan Hongling hesitated for a moment. Just now the figure passed by very quickly, so I might not have seen it clearly. But I feel that she looks like Zhuang Yuting. Anyway, their figures are very similar. Zi Yuan knew that this matter was not a trivial matter. Yan Feng was hiding in the dark and spying on the Fox Zen School. This was already a thorn in Li Yundong's heart, making him unable to sleep or eat in peace. Zi Yuan asked seriously, Hongling, this matter can't be vague. Did you see it or not? Ruan Hongling thought about it seriously and said, In fact, I didn't see it clearly, but when I saw this person, she seemed to be deliberately avoiding me. Then when I looked at her back, Chao Yi's name came to my mind subconsciously. Hearing this, everyone felt a chill run down their spines, as if Yan Feng was watching them from some dark corner of this place. Su Chan pulled Li Yundong's sleeve with a frightened face and said, Yundong, did Yan Feng sneak into the Taoist assembly? Xueqi, who was lying on his back, said softly, Master, I always feel that this Taoist assembly is a trap. When the little foxes heard this, they were so frightened that they looked around, as if they could not wait to escape from this place in the next second. Zi Yuan pondered for a while and frowned slightly. Wang Jinyuan wouldn't be so crazy as to use the Taoist assembly as bait, would he? Most of the people who came to the Taoist assembly were masters of the younger generation. Even if they were all killed here, the foundation of the big sects would not be shaken. Because the lifespan of a cultivator was almost infinite, a disciple could be cultivated again after his death. However, if Wang Jinyuan did this, it would attract the crazy revenge of those hidden senior masters, and the Gazao sect would be destroyed. Although Wang Jinyuan is ambitious, he is not stupid. Li Yundong also nodded and said, You're right. Xueqi, I know what you're thinking. If Wang Jinyuan wanted to use the Taoist assembly to balance things out, suppress the various sects, and let them fight each other, then his Gazao sect would benefit from it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have incited the cultivators of the various sects and sects again and again. Moreover, I believe that all the cultivators in the world are not fools. They will keep their guard up. Zi Yuan smiled in agreement and said, "That's right. I don't believe that Wang Jinyuan would have the guts to set up a trap." Li Yundong patted the little girl's head and said with a smile, "I'm here. Don't worry. Even if it's a trap, they can't do anything to me." Su Chan looked at the boy in front of her with infatuation. When she first met him, he was just a little boy who didn't know anything about cultivation. But now, he had grown into an indomitable master. As long as he was in front of her, even if the sky fell down, she didn't need to be afraid. The little girl nodded heavily and looked at Li Yundong with great admiration and dependence. She said with a smile, "Yes, my Yundong is now a great master. Even if there are tricks, you won't be afraid, right?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "This is what it means to be strong enough to defeat 10 people. In the face of true strength, all schemes and tricks were useless. It's fine if Yan Feng doesn't come, but if she does, I'll make sure she won't be able to return." When the little foxes of the Fox Zen school heard this, their uneasy hearts immediately relaxed. They chattered one after another, "Yes, leader is here. There's nothing to be afraid of." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Let's go. Don't delay here. Everyone, just pay more attention later." The group of people walked through the long corridor and followed the sound of pingtan. After walking for about 10 meters, they stopped in front of a small 2-story building. Li Yundong took a look and saw that it was an ancient building with flying eaves and black tiles and white walls. On the 4 eaves of the first and second floors stood 4 divine beasts, namely the azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise. Under the 4 divine beasts, there was a bell hanging. When the breeze blew, it made a crisp sound, which was particularly pleasant to the ear in the soft and pleasant sound of pingtan. Li Yundong looked around and saw that although the courtyard in front of the building was not big, there were lakes, stones, and rockery. Moreover, the shape was lifelike, the structure was rigorous, and the levels were clear. At first glance, he could tell that it had been designed by a master. The rarest thing was that along the way, Li Yundong didn't find the slightest similarity in the scenery. There were really mountain paths, caves, valleys, dangerous roads, and cliffs all over the rockery. It was really a feeling of looking at all sides of the mountain, and the scenery changed step by step. Li Yundong couldn't help but praise with a smile. Even if there is a trap here, the person who designed it is also an elegant person. After that, he walked inside with the girls. As soon as he entered the door, he saw 2 couplets. The first one was, "The hills and ravines are in the chest. Looking at the stacked stones and sparse springs, there is a natural painting book." The second one was, "Under the garden, I am willing to carry a zither and wine, and travel outside." Li Yundong couldn't help but cheer. "Good couplet, good couplet." His voice was so loud that Wang Jinyuan, who was upstairs, heard it and went downstairs. He cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Zhenren Li, there are better couplets upstairs. Please come in." Li Yundong chuckled, cupped his hands to Wang Jinyuan, and said, "Master Wan, you are so elegant. Why didn't you choose this place for the Taoist assembly earlier?" Sect Master Wan chuckled and said in a low voice, "Good treasures are always hidden and not willing to take them out." After that, he winked at Li Yundong and said, "You'll know when you go up and have a look later." Li Yundong was curious. He stepped upstairs and saw that it was already full of friends. They were all cultivators from various sects on the yacht. These cultivators were all focused in one direction. Some closed their eyes and shook their heads, looking intoxicated. Some nodded slightly with a smile on their faces, but none of them looked at Li Yundong. Li Yundong was surprised. He followed everyone's gaze and saw 2 women sitting upstairs. One of them was about 30 years old, wearing a purple cheongsam with gold rims and holding a sanxian in her hand. Her face was profile, and her appearance was quite good. Sitting next to her was a young woman, whose face was blocked. She was wearing a crisp cyan cheongsam with floral patterns and holding a pipa in her arms. She was playing it slowly. Li Yundong heard that her voice was clear and soft, and her Wunong soft language was pleasant to listen to. When it was clear, it sounded like the chirping of a white spirit in the mountains, lingering for 3 days. When it was soft, it sounded like honey making wine. It was so sweet that every pore of his seemed to have a sweet and soft feeling. Li Yundong was stunned. He looked back and saw that Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others were also listening to the song in a daze. No one urged him to go forward. Li Yundong couldn't help but be curious. Which famous master is singing Pingtan? Why is she singing so well? Although he couldn't understand the Wunong soft language, he could vaguely feel a kind of delicate feeling when he listened to her singing. I wonder what this woman looks like since her voice is so beautiful? He couldn't help but walk upstairs quickly and stretch out his head to take a look. At first glance, he saw that the girl was about 16 or 17 years old. She was extremely beautiful, not inferior to Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin. What was even rarer was that the girl had red lips and white teeth. She was delicate and pretty, and her eyes were like a clear spring flowing down from a mountain stream. It made people feel comfortable as if they were drinking fine wine, but there was no evil thought in their hearts. Li Yundong saw this and was secretly amazed. He turned his head and said to Su Chan and the others, who were listening in a daze, "Hey, how long are you going to stand on the stairs?" Only then did Su Chan and the others wake up from a dream. They followed Li Yundong up and sat in their seats. At this time, the cultivators at the next table noticed the arrival of Li Yundong and the others, but they only glanced at Li Yundong a few times before quickly looking away and listening to the girl continue to sing. After Li Yundong sat down, he looked at the 2 women who were singing Pingtan seriously. He saw that the woman holding the sanxian had thick makeup on her face, and her eyebrows were full of beauty. The girl next to her had a pair of bright pearl earrings on her ears and a pair of jade bracelets on her hands. When she plucked the strings of the zither with her fingers, the bracelets danced brightly, like a faint green afterimage, which was very beautiful. After listening for a while, Li Yundong suddenly found that Su Chan and the other little foxes of the Fox Zen school looked unhappy. So he whispered to Su Chan, "What's wrong?" Su Chan whispered to Li Yundong with a look of displeasure, "I don't like it." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Why? Do you think she's beautiful and sings well?" Su Chan said angrily, "No, she's singing the investiture of the gods. It happens to be the part where Jiang Taigong subdued Daji and subdued demons." Li Yundong said curiously, "No way. Is it such a coincidence? It's quite appropriate. It just so happens that you have a group of little vixens here." Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong and said, "You're so annoying. I don't like people calling me a vixen. Aren't we wronged? We didn't seduce anyone. Why do we have to bear this infamy?" Li Yundong moved closer to Su Chan's ear and whispered with a smile, "But you are a charming little vixen. I love you so much." Su Chan's ear was tickled by Li Yundong's breath. She giggled and said, "You're so annoying. Just now you were acting like a great cultivator, but now you're acting like a little hooligan. Don't you know where you are and who are around you? How embarrassing it is to be seen by others." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Fool, I just want you to know that don't think too much. With me here, you don't need to think about what others think. If someone dares to kill you, I'll kill him first." Hearing this, Su Chan's heart warmed and she smiled sweetly at Li Yundong. The 2 of them were talking intimately as if there was no one else around, but suddenly, they heard the thunderous applause in the small building. The girl had finished singing. Only then did Li Yundong look at the stage and see the young girl standing up with the pipa in her arms. Her posture was really graceful. She smiled shyly at the crowd, then turned around and went into the back room. After the girl entered the dressing room in the back room, the smile on her face immediately disappeared. She looked around vigilantly, then turned around and walked out of the back door of the back room. She came to a remote corner and whispered, "Master, master? Are you there?" "They're here." At this time, a person walked out of the corner. Her figure was hidden in the shadows, and her face could not be seen clearly. However, the voice of a woman could be heard. She said coldly, "Are they all here?" The girl nodded, and there was a hint of fear between her brows. She said softly, "Yes, they're all here." The woman snorted and said, "That's great. I've been planning for 9 years, and this day has finally come. Today, I'm going to wipe out the Fox Zen School and let all the cultivators in the world know the true colors of these vixens. I'll get up in the morning to make up for it. I'm really sleepy. I haven't slept well for a few days. I feel very uncomfortable, sorry. Chapter 491. Go to watch net. After the cultivators in the small building waited for the woman who sang to leave, they did not come to their senses for a while, as if their ears were still echoing with the moving singing. After a long time, they sighed and said, "It's true that this song only exists in heaven. How many times can we hear it in the human world? Well sung, well sung." Li Yundong also comforted Su Chan with a smile. "Maybe it's just a coincidence. It's not something that can be targeted at you." Su Chan propped her hands on the table and rested her chin in her palms. She pouted and said maybe. "Anyway, it sounds harsh to my ears. Watch net." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Really? I feel that this little song calms my heart. The murderous intent and bloody smell of the previous Taoist assembly have been diluted a lot." Su Chan suddenly smiled and whispered to Li Yundong, "Yundong, shall I go up and sing for you?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "No way, here. By the way, you said you could sing a song. But how do you know how to sing Pingtan?" Su Chan said with a smile, "My master taught me." She knew a lot of things. There was nothing in the world that she couldn't do. Moreover, I lived in Dongwu City with my master for a while, so I learned the dialect here and some Pingtan. Yundong, you have to listen to me sing for you when you go back. You have to. Li Yunyang laughed. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Wan Zhenyuan cupping his hands to the cultivators of the various sects and saying, "Everyone, I'm really sorry for what happened at the Taoist assembly. I, Wan Zhenyuan, would like to apologize to everyone here." The cultivators of the various sects laughed. Someone said loudly, "Master Wan, you should have brought us to such a good place a long time ago." "That's right, sect leader Wan. Seeing that your place is not bad and much better than that broken yacht, we'll forgive you. Sect leader Wan, you're not kind at all, keeping a mistress in your house. These two beauties, one big and one small, must have, must have." Among them, Dang Chong's voice was the loudest. He said loudly, "Sect Master Wan, call that little girl out again. At least let us know her name." Someone next to him immediately made fun of him and said, "Dang Chong, do you want to eat the cradle?" Dang Chong rubbed his head and said loudly, "Am I that old? Look at me. I haven't even had a single strand of white hair. How am I old?" Everyone looked at Dang Chong's bald head and laughed. "Dang Chong, you don't have a single hair on your head." Someone laughed loudly and said, "Dang Chong, when you took off all your clothes just now, I saw that the hair down there was white." When everyone heard this, they burst into laughter. Li Yundong was listening to them with a smile, but when he heard this, he almost spat out a mouthful of tea. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Aren't these people too rude? Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, suddenly pursed her lips and said with a smile, "Master, you used to be much rougher than them." Li Yundong pretended to be surprised. "Really? How thick is it?" This sentence had a double meaning, and Zhou Qin's cheeks immediately turned red. She muttered in a low voice, "I said you were fat, and you really did it. You're so annoying." Su Chan, Wan Hongling, and the little foxes all laughed. Zi Yuan was also quite smiling. She said, "You are now only one step away from becoming a great cultivator. Naturally, you can't be as careless as before. Moreover, cultivation is about cultivating your body and qi. If you are still the same as before, then your kung fu will be in vain." Li Yundong said to Zhou Qin with a smile, "Did you see that? Zi Yuan is so kind. How can your disciple ruin my show in public?" While they were talking, they saw Dang Chong arguing with someone about the color of his hair. A cultivator laughed loudly and said, "Dang Chong, don't make trouble. We are still waiting to listen to a little song." "That's right. Master Wan, call the little girl up and sing another song. I haven't heard such a beautiful song for a long time." Wan Zhenyuan laughed and said, "Everyone, please excuse me. If you want to listen to a little song, of course you can. However, do we still have to fight? Or should we have a duel and sing a song?" Everyone burst into laughter, and for a moment, the hostility of all the sects dissipated a lot. Wan Zhenyuan glanced at Li Yundong and Yu Shang and said with a smile, "Zhenren Li, Zhenren Yu, please." Yu Shang stood up expressionlessly, walked into the field, and cupped his hands to Li Yundong. "Zhenren Li, Zhenren Yu, shall we have a competition?" Li Yundong chuckled. He looked around and said, Zhenrenyu, look at the narrow space upstairs, and there is a lot of antique furniture. If we fight, I'm afraid this building will be destroyed. This place is so quiet and elegant. It would be a pity to destroy it. Moreover, it would ruin the scenery if we fought. I think it would be better for us to sit and fight. What do you think? Yu Sheng was stunned and asked, how can we fight while sitting? Li Yundong stood up, cupped his hands to Wang Jinyuan, and said with a smile, Master Wan, please make an empty table. Wang Jinyuan smiled and said, no problem. After that, he ordered his subordinates to vacate a table in the center of the field. Li Yundong walked to the table and said to Yu Sheng with a smile, Zhenrenyu, we agreed to fight with our yang spirit bodies, but since we are yang spirit bodies, we can change a lot. Why don't we use this table as a spirit space? The two of us can use our yang spirits and fight on the table? Yu Sheng also walked to the table and asked in confusion, how do we fight? Li Yundong chuckled and said, the yang spirit can change at will. Let's see whose change is more subtle and whose is more powerful. What do you think? Yu Sheng thought for a moment and said decisively, okay. Let's do as you say. Li Yundong smiled slightly. He didn't move, but soon a palm-sized little man jumped out of the Bai Hui acupoint on the top of his head. This little man was like a miniature version of Li Yundong, looking at everyone with a smile on the table. Yu Sheng also remained calm. He quickly controlled his yang spirit body to turn into a little man and jumped onto the table. Li Yundong smiled and said, Zhenrenyu, why don't you go first? Yu Sheng didn't stand on ceremony. He immediately turned his yang spirit into a white tiger. Although this tiger was small, the character Wang on its forehead was prominent, and its mane was majestic. No one dared to look down on it. Li Yundong smiled and said, what a white tiger. Watch me. As he spoke, Li Yundong controlled the yang spirit to turn into an azure dragon and fight with Yu Sheng's white tiger. At this time, all the cultivators present were staring at the yang spirit of the two people fighting on the table. Even the woman who had been singing before and the girl who had returned at some point were looking up curiously. Zi Yuan, who was standing by the side of the field, saw Zhou Qin looking at the table in confusion, as if she didn't understand the mystery of this battle. She explained with a smile, Zhou Qin, do you remember that Erlang Shen fought with the great sage, equal to heaven in the journey to the west? Zhou Qin's heart skipped a beat and she asked tentatively, could it be that the two of them kept changing, and then Erlang Shen caught Sun Wukong? Zi Yuan nodded and said with a smile, exactly. The battle between Li Yundong and Yu Sheng is a competition of the changes of their yang spirits, to see who can change more and whose ability to change is more powerful. This battle doesn't seem to be as intense as the previous ones, but the consumption of zhenqi and effort is far greater than that of the previous ones. Moreover, look at this scene, Yu Sheng has transformed into a white tiger, while Li Yundong has chosen to transform into an azure dragon. The white tiger is the earth, and the azure dragon is the sky. Since ancient times, the sky has been greater than the earth, and the azure dragon is also ranked above the white tiger. Therefore, Li Yundong's transformation can suppress Yu Sheng. As she spoke, Yu Sheng's white tiger fought with Li Yundong's azure dragon for a while and gradually lost its strength. Yu Sheng frowned, and the white tiger immediately jumped out of the battle. It shook its body and turned into a burly man. This man was as muscular as a strong man, with a bare chest and exposed abdomen, wings on his back, 3 eyes on his forehead, but his face was red like a monkey's. His feet were like an eagle's, his left hand was holding a wedge, and his right hand was holding an awl. He hit the huge drum hanging from his waist and abdomen with both hands. There was a loud crack on the table, and a small bolt of lightning struck down toward the azure dragon transformed from Li Yundong's yang spirit. Zi Yuan was shocked. This is Thunder God. Yu Sheng's yang spirit is really powerful. What a good transformation. Zhou Qin asked curiously, can Thunder God suppress the azure dragon? Zi Yuan smiled and said, of course. The azure dragon is just a divine beast, while the thunder god is a god. Divine beasts are divine beasts, and the gods are in front of the beasts. Therefore, when the gods appear, all divine beasts have to surrender. Moreover, since ancient times, which divine beast has not been the mount of the immortals? Zhou Qin asked anxiously, Master, will you also become a god? Zi Yuan shook her head and said with a smile, then it will become a head-on fight again. There is rarely a difference between the gods. If you want to determine who is stronger, You can only fight head-on. Both of them are masters. If they really fight, I'm afraid this building will not be able to survive. As the two of them were talking, Li Yundong suddenly shook his body. The azure dragon instantly turned into a small earthworm and drilled into the table. Zi Yuan immediately nodded slightly and praised. Not bad, Li Yundong really has the demeanor of a great cultivator. Zhou Qin said curiously, Master, you've been so aggrieved that you've turned into an earthworm. How can you still have the demeanor of a great cultivator? Zi Yuan smiled and said, What is a dragon? Dragons can soar above the 9th heaven, but they can also hide under the 9th earth. Although the thunder god is powerful, the art of thunder and lightning can't hit the earthworm hiding under the ground. All things in the world reinforce and restrain each other, and one thing subdues another. When Yu Shang saw that all the thunder and lightning from his thunder god had failed, he snorted and immediately turned the thunder god into a rooster. He lowered his head and pecked at Li Yundong, who was hiding on the table with his hard beak. Unexpectedly, when he pecked out, Li Yundong had turned from an earthworm into a big python in the blink of an eye, tightly entangling the rooster. Yu Sheng's reaction was extremely fast. He immediately turned into a civet and turned around to bite Li Yundong. Everyone saw that Li Yundong and Yu Sheng were changing constantly. Almost every change would not last more than 5 seconds. Sometimes, they would even change several times in a row in the blink of an eye, which was too much for their eyes to take in and they couldn't react. Everyone present stared at the table with their eyes wide open, for fear of missing any changes. Even Wan Zhenyuan looked at the field with a shocked expression. He thought to himself, this Yu Sheng is really powerful. No wonder he is known as the best of the younger generation of the Chuanjin dragon sect. But why is Li Yundong's young spirit also so powerful? He's young and hasn't cultivated for long. How on earth did he cultivate? While he was muttering to himself, he saw a subordinate come over and whisper a few words in his ear. Wan Zhenyuan glanced at him unhappily, blaming him for disturbing him from watching such a wonderful, intense, and unique battle. But when he heard the words of his subordinate, he was stunned and couldn't help asking, Are they foreigners? They want to watch our Taoist assembly? The subordinate nodded and said, Yes, that's what they said. Wan Zhenyuan waved his hand impatiently and said, No, I don't care how they know about the Taoist assembly, but foreigners can't come. But as he spoke, he heard footsteps coming from the stairwell, and 3 people came up unhurriedly from downstairs. The one in the lead was an innocent and pretty little girl dressed in a gorgeous kimono. Behind her was a short old man with a pale face. Behind the old man was a tall young man with a docile face. These 3 people were none other than Xinyan, Shinsu, and Tachibana Wakako from the Shingen Tantrism of Mount Koya in Japan. This was the update from yesterday. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.